Good evening, everyone. I'm Councilman Ed Reisinger, Chairman of the Land Use Committee. I welcome you to City Council chambers. The one ground rule that I have, would you please turn off or put on mute your cell phones to give courtesy and respect to those who are going to testify.
Unmute me for a minute.
This is modern technology, the first time, so you got that? So I just want to acknowledge some of my colleagues. To my far left is the Vice Chair of the committee, Councilwoman Shannon Sneed.
Yeah.
To her right is Councilwoman Mary Pat Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
To my second to my left is Councilman Chris Burnett, who sponsored the resolution for the informational hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
To my far right is Councilman Robert Stokes. To his left is Councilman John Bullock. To his left is Councilman Eric Costello. Also, we have Councilman Leon Pinkett. We have, for the President's office, we have Rebecca Simmons, who's the General Counsel for the President's office, Caitlin Young, and Mike Huber. Representing the Mayor's office is Matt Stegman and Nina Themelis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Did I get everybody, Council? Yes. Okay. Also, we have, to my right, is the staff person to the committee, Ms. Jennifer Coates. And before we start, Councilman Burnett, you're the sponsor. Oh, yeah, before I go in, I jumped the gun. We're here for City Council Resolution 19-0159. This is an investigative hearing, building backups of untreated sewage for the purpose of inviting representatives from the Department of Public Works, Law Department, Office of Information and Technology, the Health Department, the Mayor's Office of Emergency Management, which will discuss the effectiveness and sufficiency of measures being taken to address basement backups of raw sewage in the city. And so, at this time, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Councilman Burnett, who sponsored the resolution. Councilman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and everyone, city agencies, advocates, residents, for coming out to talk about this very important issue of wastewater backups in the city of Baltimore. This is, and I'm not going to belabor the point because we have a lot of stories, a lot of testimony, but this is a public health crisis that residents in the city of Baltimore have been impacted by for literally decades. The issue of wastewater backups into their home and the systemic disinvestment in our city's infrastructure to prevent that from continuing to occur and hurting families across the city of Baltimore. The focus today is on the expedited reimbursement program created by the Department of Public Works, resulting from the consent decree, the 2002 consent decree on this very issue. Last year, the city created a $2 million fund to reimburse homeowners who've been impacted by wastewater in their basements, which is capped at $2,500. We later found out that the vast majority of those claims are denied on a regular basis, and that only $14,775 has been paid out of that fund, which is absolutely unacceptable. And so the intent of this hearing is to, one, hear the stories of people who deal with this on a day-to-day basis. We also sent questions ahead of the hearing to the Department of Public Works, so we will be asking for responses to those questions at this hearing. And my hope is that, one, we learn from this hearing and everything that comes out of this, we get some best practices and results from the agency when it comes to making people whole. This is something that impacts the entire city of Baltimore, in every neighborhood, regardless of where you live, and it's a public health crisis that we absolutely have to address. So I want to thank the chairman for scheduling this as quickly as we've could and expediting it. And yeah, with that, I'll stop talking. We do have a series of panels that we wanted to bring up, but we also will have testimony from the public as well. So did you want me to call the first panel up?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to thank you, Councilman, for taking the leadership role in this, because it is a crisis. And to where regards to DPW, I'll say it out loud that they didn't do the job and follow through with it. But let's move on. So if you have, what we usually do is have the agency heads, testifying, but we're going to reverse it. And talking to the councilman, he recommended, suggested that we have the advocates and the community leaders and the general public to testify first. So anyone from the general public that wants to testify, there's a sign-in sheet back there. Just make sure you put your name and information. Appreciate it. So, Councilman, you have the list. Go ahead.
So the first panel, we're going to have Chris Haney, Alice Belpita, Joy Hatchett, Billy Walker, and Doris Brightful. If you'd like, you can all come up and find a seat in the front row. Now, I do know it's Miss Doris's birthday, so we want to have her come. First of all, can everyone say happy birthday to her? Can we do that?
Happy birthday.
She's spending it with us, talking about wastewater backup. So we do want to make sure that she gets her birthday dinner and cake in. So if you want to come up, are you able to stand, or would you like to sit at the desk? Okay. It's your call. However, whatever you want to do. Yeah. Yep. And I would also say, for anyone speaking, if you do have written testimony that you want to leave behind, you can hand it to Miss Jennifer Coates, and it'll go into the official record. And this is actually broadcasted, so the same applies to anyone watching on Charm TV Channel 25. If you want to email the committee or myself, any testimony or experiences, we'll make sure it gets to the committee. So with that, Ms. Brightful.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Doris Brightful, and I'm a resident at 5602 Elderon Avenue. My husband and I have been there for over 50 years. I've testified before on TV and all, but Jennifer just insisted that she wanted me to testify again. I have been flooded 4 times since 2014. I lost completely in 2014 everything. I had just put down brand new carpet and furniture. I lost television. I lost all my Christmas gifts were stored. Memories of pictures and all. It was very devastating, but thank God we made it. I had an insurance company. I had put a claim into the city only because we are not in a flood area, so therefore there's a $2,500 deductible before the insurance company would start taking care of. Then again, in 2015, it happened again. It comes through my toilet. There were just huge piles of fecal material all through everything. And by being a community health nurse for the city for 42 years, you know that was very devastating because of the fact of the health issue that could occur. My family wanted to go down and help. We had called 311, and they said they would come and send someone to help evacuate the water, and they didn't show until 11 o'clock the next morning. By that time, we had just put boots on, and just between the sub pump and the water continued to flow, we were able to get the water out, but the new carpet was ruined. I had knotty pine, which you know they don't make anymore. So because of the mold, it went up three steps in my basement. Everything had been totaled, including my bar and all. And then 2018 here it comes again. And this time, we could not notify our insurance company because we would be dropped. So therefore, we had to take care of everything ourselves. I have put a claim in for the fourth time. I have not heard, except that they did receive the pictures and everything of the ruins that I had. And now I'm getting a smell of sewage in my powder room on my first floor and in the basement because they're doing construction on Kennison, and because they're breaking up a lot of the pipes and everything, they said they have no control of us getting the smell of fecal material. Oh my God. That's my story. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry you had to deal with that.
I'm still blessed.
Amen. Okay. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you, Councilman Burnett and Councilman Reisinger, for hosting this session, this hearing. We really appreciate it. My name is Alice Valpita, and I'm the lead water quality scientist at Blue Water Baltimore, which is the home of the Baltimore Harbor Waterkeeper. We've been advocating for stronger clean water laws on behalf of Baltimore residents for more than 10 years. And sewage has always topped the list of pollutants plaguing our local waterways. When the city's 2002 consent decree to end sewage overflows failed to meet its original 2016 deadline, Blue Water Baltimore was the only organization to intervene in the case, and we were able to advocate for a stronger, more protective modified consent decree. Part of the new consent decree was the expedited reimbursement program for sewage backups, a pilot program which was meant to provide financial relief to homeowners and renters who are unlucky enough to find raw human sewage in their basements after a rain event. The mechanics of a sewage overflow and a sewage backup are simple enough. Our old crumbling pipes allow huge amounts of stormwater to seep into the sewage system whenever we get a heavy rain. Those pipes just aren't designed to carry that much water, and raw sewage starts flowing backwards because it has nowhere else to go. It's forced back up through your pipes, settling into the cesspool that's now your basement. Your basement, which as you just heard, often holds some of the most expensive and irreplaceable items in your home: the furnace, the hot water heater, and the washer and dryer, not to mention valuable heirlooms. The pilot program was implemented as an acknowledgement that these capacity-related sewage backups are happening to Baltimore residents through no fault of their own, but they'll continue to happen. DPW's decision to close off most of the sewer system's emergency relief valves before adequately increasing pipe capacity resulted in a predictable catastrophe. Thousands of households are flooded with sewage every year. These backups are likely to continue for years, particularly in the neighborhoods in West Baltimore whose sewage flows to the Patapsco wastewater treatment plant, where the multi-million-dollar Headworks project will have no effect. While we were pleased to see that the modified consent decree held provisions for an expedited reimbursement program, it wasn't until the first set of results were released this summer that we fully understood how problematic its implementation was. DPW's own records indicate that over 4,500 sewage backups occurred in the first year of the pilot program, and yet only 74 claims were issued. That's less than 2%. Out of those 74 claims, only 10 were approved for reimbursement. The rest were denied because a claim wasn't filed within 24 hours, the backup was determined to be caused by something other than capacity issues, or because another hurdle wasn't cleared. As we've delved into the city's own data, many questions have arisen, including: how has the city been publicizing the program and the details for how to apply? It appears that most people affected by sewage backups have no idea that an expedited program even exists. And at what point is a sewer line blockage deemed to be the culprit of a backup and not caused by the backup itself? Even if a line is blocked, why does that mean that a resident is at fault for a backup in their home? Why are claims being denied on a basis of no surcharging when verified wet weather sewage overflows are occurring on the same day, less than a mile away of those claim addresses? And finally, there's $2 million set aside annually for this reimbursement program, but as we've already heard, less than $15,000 was paid out in the first year. So where's the rest of that money? We have so many questions, but the data speaks for itself. This program isn't working, and Baltimore deserves more. We have a full list of recommendations that could be implemented to improve the program, and nothing in the consent decree prevents our city from doing so. These recommendations are detailed in Blue Water Baltimore's written testimony, which also describes our analysis of DPW's quarterly report data. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Good. Okay. Chris?
You got the list?
Yeah.
Thank you for the invitation to come today. My name is Chris Heaney, and I'm an associate professor of environmental health and engineering at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Just disclaimer, the views and opinions I'm going to present don't represent those of Johns Hopkins University. But as an environmental epidemiologist, as an exposure scientist, I study the health effects of exposure to pathogens in the environments where we live, where we work, and where we play. And I've been asked to come today to provide a perspective about what we know about the human health effects of exposure to fecal pollution and pathogens in wastewater, because of its relevance to the situations that we're hearing about in homes in Baltimore related to basement sanitary sewer backups. So, it's kind of a bit ironic because the evidence of public health impacts is not in question here. We've known for 100 years, if not longer, that exposure to raw untreated sewage is a significant cause of human disease. This ranges from exposure to viruses, bacteria, protozoa, helminths, including things like norovirus, hepatitis A virus, adenovirus, salmonella, campylobacter, shigella, vibrio species, including cholera and other forms, cryptosporidium, giardia, all kinds of helminths and worms. Raw sewage is bad for human health. This is a universal. And the civil engineering solutions that we've achieved through improvements in wastewater infrastructure, the collection from homes, is one of the hallmark achievements in public health. It is is at the pinnacle in reducing human disease burden in modern cities as we've intensified urbanization and had to deal with concentration of waste, particularly sewage. The other, besides the kind of the what we think about are the obvious, sort of the enteric or the GI gastrointestinal illnesses, is the fact that if you have water intrusion into homes, it can also lead to formation of mold, fungi, and bacteria, which is a huge concern for individuals who have respiratory health problems, which is another huge problem in Baltimore City with asthma, particularly affecting susceptible groups like children and the elderly who are suffering from COPD. So there is an obvious evidence base around some of the enteric infections and things, but that respiratory health, I think, we shouldn't be overlooked in terms of this problem. Globally, this public health base of evidence has led to the United Nations declaring that the right to water and sanitation should be universal human rights, that everyone should be able to achieve. Access to basic sanitation, to safe living environment, including clean water, that should be a basic human right. And in many ways, when you look across the world, nations like the United States kind of get that sense of we've achieved that. But the United Nations is taking a deeper look at gaps, places where there are intransigent lack or lack of achievement of access to these sanitation benefits by people. And unfortunately, from what we're hearing, I think Baltimore has some work to do in terms of promoting the access, equal, equitable access to all residents in the city. So some of the research questions that I think could be important that we have been collaborating with folks to look at, and we are eager to collaborate continually with the Department of Public Works, would be, in a city like Baltimore, is everyone experiencing equal impact, or is there a disparate impact question? And that's something that a Master's of Health Sciences student that I advised last year looked into, taking the 2018 quarterly reports of the frequency and the location of the sewage backups through the 2018 quarterly report. And she linked those information and did a lot of painstaking work to get down to the block intersection, and then aggregated those counts of backups at the census tract level. And then she looked and connected census data on percent African American, percent of renter versus home ownership, educational attainment, other socio-demographic factors. And in the analysis, when you look at all these as potentially related factors, race and ethnicity was the most strongly related to the frequency of increased sewage backups. And although that is an association, The research question as it's formulated speaks to, regardless of the engineered reason, where does it appear and what groups of people are experiencing a disproportionate impact due to this issue in the city? And that analysis appears to suggest that as there's a greater percentage of residents who are African American, that they're experiencing a greater frequency of sewage backups. And that speaks to an equity issue and an environmental health disparity, which I think deserves serious attention. And we would be happy as the research entities in the city to collaborate and to work further to try to help provide improvements on the evidence base in that regard. So I thank you very much, and I'd be happy to address any questions.
How you doing today? Thank you, committee members, for hosting this hearing. My name is Billy Walker. I'm a Maryland licensed public adjuster, certified by the Institute of Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification in Water Damage. I'd like to educate Baltimore and surrounding areas on how to maintain and protect their properties safely and correctly. I have the opportunity to advocate on behalf of several homeowners and business owners alike when dealing with losses that pertain to water damage. Water damages have fallen into different categories between 1 and 3, with 3 being the worst. Several of these losses were due to sewage, which falls under Category 3. Category 3 is a water which is grossly contaminated and can contain pathogenic, toxigenic, and harmful agents. I'm not sure if any of you have experienced a sewage backup. It's a matter that has to be addressed by restoration workers that not only have experience in sewage backup cleanup, but also workers that have to use the appropriate personal protective equipment. These workers also have a responsibility to inform building occupants of and protect them from health and safety issues, including visible mold growth, since mold can grow within 24 to 48 hours, slip and fall hazards, a common concern for building occupants, electrical, asbestos, lead, and chemical exposures, and sewage contaminations. Once the building occupants are made aware of these hazards, it becomes a situation where they have to relocate until they have the area remediated by an experienced and licensed remediation company. This is an expense that should also be considered within the reimbursement program. It is highly unlikely that a property owner will be able to retain the expert services of a qualified and properly trained remediation crew for $2,500. The work involved does not only involve cleanup. There are other factors that must take place which are regulated. These factors include the removal and proper disposal of unwanted and non-salvageable material and particulates, extraction of the sewage which can take multiple passes, specialized equipment used to induce evaporation, dehumidification to remove evaporated air from structural materials and contents which minimize the secondary damages and health hazards, temperature control used to increase the evaporation rate and dehumidification effectiveness, removal of remaining contaminants, and repairs that should be performed by quality and properly licensed technicians. The whole area should be abated by qualified persons and also comply with the applicable federal, state, and local laws and regulations. The final step, outside of what was just outlined, is to retain an indoor environmental professional to access the property to assess levels of contamination, evaluate, and determine if the property is occupant safe. As previously stated, there are several steps to take. Many persons involved that extremely exceed just cleanup when it comes to addressing the sewage backup, and the costs associated will definitely exceed the $2,500 cap. I ask that each and every committee member takes into consideration that the expedited reimbursement program should be reevaluated to not only include a cap, since there are too many moving parts involved with costs when addressing the sewage backup, and also to take into consideration that homeowners are not the only property owners that sewage backup affects. This program should be made available to anyone that maintains a structure that has experienced a sewage backup. I appreciate all the committee members for allowing me to take a few minutes of your time. I close by saying that I plead that this matter becomes a requirement for Baltimore City to improve not only its knowledge, but also its response to sewage backups. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Joy Hatchett with the Maryland Insurance Administration, and we're the state agency that regulates the insurance companies. And I'm here this evening to give you a little bit of background information about how insurance interplays with this. And with me this evening is Mike Patty, the director of our Government Affairs Department. So essentially, as the regulator of insurance companies, we're the ones that make sure that the insurance companies comply with Maryland laws. And if people have issues with insurance companies, we're the state agency that you can come to if you don't think that your claim has been handled properly. But a primary purpose of my unit, which is consumer education, is to teach people about their homeowners policies, to make sure that they understand the coverages, the limitations, and the exclusions. And one of the things that individuals can purchase with their homeowners policy is a rider. It's called water sewer backup rider, but they have to purchase that. So homeowners, one of the big things is a lot of homeowners don't realize that they need to actually make that purchase. It's not going to be in your policy unless you purchase that. Now, there are different levels of water sewer backup level that you can purchase, either $5,000 worth of coverage or up to policy limits. So one of the things that we try to educate consumers about is $5,000 going to be enough money to pay for the cleanup if you have this happen? And as we heard the young lady speak to this evening, insurance companies all have underwriting guidelines. So if you file too many claims, first, your premiums will go up. And second, one of the results will be you could be canceled. So it's important that other sources are available to help these consumers pay for this cleanup. And also, one of the big things is that there's going to be a deductible. And that deductible could be thousands of dollars. And that could be a significant gap for your policyholders. And one of the other things that I was asked to address was whether my unit had ever heard of this program. And the answer is no. My folks happened upon it this past summer. And let me tell you why that's a little bit surprising to me. My unit does over 500 to 600 events all around the state every year. We are in Baltimore City multiple times. My unit is also responsible for disaster response. So when there's a tornado, a flood, a water sewer backup, or anything else, we're there on scene. And one of the things that Commissioner Redmer demands of us, if it's not covered by insurance, we try to make sure that consumers know of other resources. So we do lots of referrals when we know about programs. So we knew some programs with Department of Housing. We knew some programs with Department of Aging. This particular program, we did not know about. So that's one of the things, if nothing else, let's share information so that we can do what we're supposed to do for all of our constituents. Thank you.
As chairman of the committee, what I'm asking for is that to look through the lens of the health effects. Chris and Billy, if you could, I know you're sending an information to Councilman Burnett and his staff, but if you could send us information regards to the health effects to the staff, I would appreciate it, because I think we need, not just for DPW to go with the programs and be more effective, but now I'm looking at it, the health effect that it has from the residents and, that are affected by this. So.
Absolutely, be happy to.
So I had a quick follow-up to Mr. Walker. You mentioned, what is the average cost of repairs and remediation for wastewater backups based on your knowledge? Or obviously there's sort of a citywide perspective, but if you could give us sort of anecdotally what this would run typically in Baltimore City.
Right. Well, it's usually in the 5-figure range. A lot of it pertains to contents. Some people have a lot of, they might have artwork, they may have a lot of valuables, and with it being a Category 3 water, you don't have the option to bring in a crew to just clean it. That's like the worst state of water there is. It has to be removed. You may have padding underneath. You may have asbestos shingles underneath. Those get affected, then you have to go through another series of remediation. So you can't really pinpoint one number because every property is probably different. Of course, in older homes, you're gonna have problems with asbestos and lead flooring. So it's not like an across-the-board number. You just have to go at each one and see what happens when you address it.
And how many, again, anecdotally, is it pretty normal for you to see the same clients repeatedly in a given year?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the properties are old. We have the whole lead and asbestos. I mean, you can encapsulate, but the thing is that once it gets penetrated by water, it has to be removed. And us as homeowners or anybody as a homeowner, they're not licensed to go through that type of abatement, so they have to bring in a professional. And more times than none, it will be over $2,500.
And Mr. Chair, I had a couple more. For Ms. Valpita or Mr. Haney, can you speak to how, obviously we see photos of when it's purely wastewater backups that may not necessarily be connected to a flood event. One of the things that many of my constituents experienced last year was we had 2 very significant flood events that caused both just general flooding, but what wasn't necessarily a part of the conversation initially was the fact that the water could be contaminated. Can you speak to that a little bit? Like, how apparent is it? Is it always apparent that there may be contamination in the water or not?
Sure. So sometimes it's not very apparent, exactly like what you're talking about. In a recent water bill, DPW did add an insert about the reimbursement program, but the language in the insert says to contact DPW if you find water in your basement. And that's just misleading because we're not just talking about water, we're talking about raw human sewage. So just like, at what point is sewage mixed with stormwater no longer a health concern? I can't answer that question. I'm not sure if anybody can, because I think the point is that sewage is present in the water. So even if you're not seeing floatable wastewater debris, which is a really polite way of saying anything that you would flush, even though you're not seeing those solids in the backup, the bacteria, the pathogens, the viruses, the things that are really harmful to human health are still in there.
Yeah, I think I can add something that might help to that. I mean, in the way the EPA, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, sets its guidelines to make the waters of the United States fishable and swimmable, they've done a series of human health studies. And those human health studies are done at, recreation, places where people recreate, not dissimilar to the coast here, or the Chesapeake Bay, or the coast here on the Atlantic. And something that's universal is when it rains, it conveys the pollutants into the water, which makes the waters a greater risk for human health effects, for disease outcomes. So the scenario that you're raising is an important one in that, there is very little, debate or disconnect in the literature on human sewage and its health effects, right? If that is apparent and happening, that is a clear human health risk, as we've heard from the colleague over here. In terms of its implications for even recovering items from people's homes or not. But flooding in general is associated with a loading of things that are also harmful and not good. So the scenario you're describing would be, from what we know from the human health studies, associated with increased risks for human health due to exposure to some of the same pollutants.
So I'm just curious. Thank you. I'm just curious to ask too, so what happens, like you said, when a person has had the backup a number of times, they no longer allowed to get insurance? At any point, what happens? Like, what's the last resort for the homeowner?
Well, the company that they currently have, the standard companies, will counsel them. However, there is a homeowner's insurer of last resorts. It's called the JIA, similar to MAIF. So it's basically the premium that you would pay is more expensive, and the coverage won't be the same level of coverage under your standard homeowner's policy. And things like this water sewer backup, generally, I'm not certain of whether JIA would even cover water sewer backup. So it's just like as if a person has a fire and doesn't have a homeowner's policy, they won't have a policy to pay the claim. So they have to come out of pocket for that.
But for a fire, it may be someone's fault, but for the sewage backup, it's not anyone's fault. So I'm just, wow.
You have to remember that your insurance is a contract that you enter into. And if you don't meet their requirements, then you don't get to be a part of that contract.
And in practice, often what we're seeing is that people just stop reporting it. There's also a huge level of trauma and shame associated with sewage backups that we haven't even really touched on tonight. We will later when we start hearing some more resident stories, I believe. But when this keeps happening to somebody over and over and over again, and when they're not getting the help that they need, eventually people just stop asking for help.
And also, let me just, to the extent it's pure water sewer backup and you've bought the rider, you'll have coverage. However, if it's water sewer backup and flooding, under your homeowner's policy, that's going to be excluded, because if your policy has a covered event like water sewer backup and an event that's not covered like flooding, the policy doesn't pay. It's called concurrent causation. So the event that last summer where there was a mix of flooding and water sewer backup, we had cases that did not get paid because of concurrent causation. So those consumers had to come out of pocket for everything.
Councilman, yeah.
In the insurance arena, anytime there are multiple causes of damage, if one of the causes,
Yeah, Mr., put the mic to you.
if one of the causes is something that's not covered by your insurance policy, the insurance policy will not pay. And it's not just for water sewer backup, it's for anything. You've got a covered loss and an uncovered loss that have caused the damage. Under the specific terms of the contract, no coverage. That's why it's so important. We do so much to try to educate consumers.
Councilman Pinkett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this question is for you, ma'am, with the insurance, or it might be for the other panelists as well, but you mentioned some of the supports that you were familiar with. Are you aware of any other reimbursement programs that other municipalities have? And if so, do you know the dollar amounts that are associated with those? And maybe some of the other panelists might be aware of.
I know of a few. I know that after events, the state, through their Department of Housing and Community Development, if there's money, then they can do some things in terms of loans or grants, but there has to be money. If there's a federal declaration, there may also be some money that's available, but that's a much bigger event than some of these smaller instances that we had. Sometimes the Department of Social Services will have a little bit of money here and there, sometimes the Department of Aging. We just try to go out and look for resources,
But, I
but
mean-
they're drying up.
But I mean, specific to any of the other counties.
So the gentleman who's going to be joining us
Okay.
via Skype is from Cincinnati, and he'll be talking about their consent decree, which provides for direct assistance, which he'll talk more about, and also a more comprehensive reimbursement program.
Okay, and so I'll wait for that, but my second question would be, and once again, it's for the panel, but based upon your experiences in the insurance field, if our Department of Public Works would have brought in, say for example, you as an advisor on what would be an appropriate level of reimbursement for an experience, from your professional experience and the typical events that you've seen, what would be, and we know you can't cover everything, but what would be a typical or be appropriate level of reimbursement or coverage, for this type of program?
If you're trying to cover the entire loss, it's really going to depend on what was damaged.
Right, right.
If I have an inch of waste in an unfinished basement, that's much less
Okay.
than if it's a living space.
Right.
And we have seen claims as little as 5,000 or 10,000 to hundreds of thousands. I mean, it just, they're all over but it's all dependent on the type of damage and the way that the quicker it's cleaned up and removed, the better.
But it sounds like in some instances, our reimbursement doesn't even come to a level to cover the deductible in certain scenarios.
2,500 would cover most
Okay,
deductibles.
okay.
There are going to be some, because now some insurance companies have moved to something called a percentage deductible, which could be several thousands
Right,
of dollars.
right.
But 2,500 at this point in time would cover a significant number of the deductibles.
Okay.
I think it's also important to remember that our pilot reimbursement program only covers the costs associated with cleaning up the sewage. So that's physically vacuum trucking out the sewage and bleaching the walls, for example. It doesn't cover any costs of replacing any of the most expensive items in your basement that have been fouled with sewage and need to be thrown away. And it doesn't have to be that way, but that's the way that it currently is.
And I guess the criteria to even be considered for the reimbursement is the city taking some responsibility for the act.
So in order to be eligible for reimbursement, this has to be a verified capacity-related sewage event, which means that it has to have been caused by basically the sewage pipes not being able to carry as much sewage mixed with stormwater as they are. And I believe that DPW representatives will be talking a little bit more about the criteria for their program.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilwoman Clark?
I just wanted to ask you were involved making recommendations when this consent decree was put together, your organization. I read your report to the committee, and you went over some of the instances where we asked for this and look what's happened kind of thing. So my question is a generic one then. How, in the process of putting this consent decree program together, how much leeway really did the city and does the city have in terms of the provisions of the program, the timing of it, the amount of the maximum award, just the requirements of it? How much flexibility from your perspective, because you were trying to influence it, you were there, do we have?
So the modified consent decree, which was signed off on by EPA and MDE, that provides for a reimbursement program. It says you must have a reimbursement program.
Must be that.
it has to be there. And there are a few details explicated in Appendix E of the consent decree, which lays out, basically, there has to be a program. The details of that program were left up to Baltimore City to determine, for the most part. So that means that Baltimore City has the option to have a much stronger reimbursement program than what currently exists. There's nothing in the consent decree preventing Baltimore City from doing more than what currently exists. What's laid out in the consent decree is a floor. It does not have to be a ceiling.
Well, good. Thank you.
Agreed.
Councilman, yeah.
Okay, thank you. We are going to now use some technology here. Bear with us. The internet connection in City Hall is questionable from time to time. But we have Dave Altman, who's a attorney based in Cincinnati, Ohio, who works on sewage backups there, but also is going to talk about that work and their reimbursement program. To your question, Councilman Baker.
Dave, can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can. I was listening to Charm City Television, trying to monitor the hearing, and I got that turned off.
Hold on 1 second. Let me transfer you over to Councilman Burnett.
All right, so yeah, if you could talk to us about your work on sewage backups and the Cincinnati reimbursement program.
Yes, I'll be happy to do that. Thank you, Councilman. Back in 2000, by the way, I'm David Alt. I actually grew up in Baltimore and went to school at Baltimore Poly, where I learned we didn't have a course in sewage, but I learned a lot about engineering there. So anyway, back in 2002, the Sierra Club, which is an environmental organization I'm sure everybody knows, came to me and asked for help getting the federal law enforced against the sewer district's violations. We were aware that the lack of capacity in our sewer system was effectively appropriating the basements of homes, and which were absorbing the backups as temporary surge tanks. Now, are you able to hear okay there? I spoke at Memorial Stadium when I was in high school, and echo, I remember, and it's coming back here, so I'll just go ahead and talk. These overflows were coming from the city and county sewer system. We showed the federal judge, who had not yet done a consent decree in the case, a video, which is available on our website, of the plight of the people, some of which you heard the information tonight, as the sewage backs up into homes. And he ordered the city and the county to come up with a way to fix the problem. Soon after that, in 2004, what they now call a sewer backup program was born. And that program is much broader than what you have apparently in Baltimore under your consent decree. It does three things that are very important. One, emergency cleanup. There's a 24/7 hotline, which is an important component of this, and frankly, of the rest of the sewer backup program. But the idea of this program is if there's any colorable backup, and believe it or not, your public works and your sewer department know, I think, a good deal more about this than maybe people realize. But I heard a little testimony earlier that indicates people do know when there is likely a backup. Because of the public health issues, they're taken care of right away by a contractor for the city. And I know the city's City of Baltimore's Public Works has some concerns about this, about liability and about other things. I've read a little bit about their testimony or their statements. In Cincinnati, these things have not been a problem. The liability to provide emergency care to your citizens does not create liability. And I don't know Maryland law. I'm not licensed to practice in Maryland, although I can certainly practice in the federal courts, but I'm not an expert on Maryland law by a long shot. I suspect this is not going to be a problem under immunity under Maryland law either. I think you're going to have some immunity and you can provide the help. So this is the first cleanup component. Why is it important? I couldn't hear the gentleman, the doctor from Hopkins, the epidemiologist, very well because the signal broke during his testimony. But mold, as well as the direct contact with human waste, mold continues to grow if it's not properly remediated. And I don't know what Baltimore is doing about this now, but I do know that's a long-lasting, growing impact of having a sewer backup that is often not, I can definitely tell you, correct. Second of all, we have a reimbursement program for damages, and broader damages than what you guys currently have. But you're appropriating that these people have a right to use. It's just that it's always been a cost that's been moved over onto your residents. And I don't think you wouldn't be having this hearing if you weren't concerned about that. So we have a very broad damage reimbursement program. And that one you do have to show that the problem was caused by the sewer district's lack of capacity in the system. And then the third component is prevention, which should be part of any program, because you want to do what you can to fix these lines and to use some of the devices that we talked about in our testimony to do that. So those are the three components. And I'm not saying our program is perfect. We're fine tuning it as, I think we froze.
We can still hear you. Just keep talking. Ooh, maybe not.
Hear you.
There we go.
Could you hear us?
Not sure whether we're on or not.
Video?
No.
Can't see you.
One moment.
Oh, you can see me.
Oh, he can? Oh.
But he's done.
I just had one or two.
Okay. No, I don't care.
We should have fun.
You're right.
While we're dealing with video difficulty, we're joined by Councilman Yitzi Slifer.
All right, let's see. Okay.
Sorry about the technology problems I understand we're having. Where were you? Where was
so
I?
you were talking about prevention.
Yes, I was just saying prevention. You must have a prevention program. Now, admittedly, prevention can be just a stopgap because very often when you prevent the problem from reoccurring in a house or apartment where it has happened multiple times, you will move the problem along to the street, down the street, to some other house or some other series of houses. But it still is worth doing and getting installed. And we talked about some of the common prevention programs that are used around the country, but here in Cincinnati in our testimony. So we want to do anything we can to help the people of Baltimore. and so if you have any questions about our program in Cincinnati, I'd be happy to try to answer.
Okay, Dave, Councilman Burnett, and then Councilman Pinkett.
Yeah, so you touched on it a little. First of all, thank you for doing this. You touched on the reimbursement program. Can you expound a little bit on what that looks like to the consumer? What the process is, when do they have to report it, so we can have sort of a better idea how it works?
Well, you're supposed to report your backup, which you certainly would know about unless you were out of town, within 24 hours. The report is the key thing. Second of all, you can file a claim. The MSD, MSD means Metropolitan Sewer Department out here, but the sewer district out here wants you to do that within 2 years, and that really isn't much of a problem because who wants to live with the damages for 2 years? So, but that's not an official limitation. But anyway, it is there. Then you submit a claim form that outlines your damages, all your damages. And the MSD or the sewer district decides which ones it's going to pay and how much it's going to pay. Now, this is a bit of the hen watching or the fox watching the hen house. I understand, because the sewer district is in effect blowing the whistle on itself. So that's why we have a federal magistrate judge who, if you don't agree with the determination of the sewer district, you quickly get a hearing, which is unheard of in courts. In almost any country, but even here in the United States, you get a quick hearing. The magistrate judge will make a determination. It's not appealable if you have to go to that resort. And very few of these people, unless they're businesses, have lawyers. And that's the way we wanted it to be, that you wouldn't need a lawyer. And we've got things to work out there because the sewer district is now hiring some of the best, fanciest, highest priced lawyers we have to battle with the person who doesn't have a lawyer. So we're going to get that straightened out. But for years and years, that has worked pretty well. You're due under the SBU program need to have an offset for your insurance that you were paid. And of course, you all, I'm sure, heard tonight, what happens is you make a claim, then your insurance company will cancel you or jack up your premium. So, but under our program, you do have to at least. Does that help give you a picture of what we do?
And I think the key piece that you mentioned was that the city itself provides the cleanup, and I think that's a key distinction. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Oh, sure. I can tell you, you don't want people and their kids going down into the basement, which actually happens if the emergency cleanup isn't done. This is a public health problem caused so many times by the lack of capacity in your system. You don't want to play games with it. And this idea that it takes a long time to make a determination is not exactly accurate. I quote Leo DeRocher, but he didn't play for the Orioles, so I'm not going to quote him. He had a phrase he used for that. It's not accurate, and that's we want to watch out for. So, but it's not the city that does it; it's contractors working with the city.
Okay.
Councilman Pinkett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Dr. Altman. Just a couple questions. How do you all, one thing we're hearing is that many people don't know even about our reimbursement program. What do you do in Cincinnati to make certain that the program is marketed, that the program is advertised appropriately so people even know to respond within 24 hours?
Well, if you look at our consent decree, it outlines minimal steps you have to take. But you've really asked a terrific question, because when we promoted the program extensively in 2004, 2005, 2006. But believe it or not, people forget. And what I would do is, first of all, it's not a gift from our sewer district. It's required in our case by a court order, or, it's not a gift. And, but whatever, you need to, through the bills, let people know about it, through advertisements. And I believe very strongly public service announcements, or PSAs, as they used to be called, maybe they're still called PSAs, where you get this regularly on television and social media in front of the people, because that is how you keep them aware of the program. And otherwise, they will forget.
Thank you. I think one other question. We have a report where there was about 4,600 backups citywide, and we're not sure if that's the total number, because they're quite sure there's some that weren't reported. But out of that, there came only 74 applications for reimbursement. Can you speak to your percentages in Cincinnati as it relates to number of claims, number of incidents, and then the number of claims associated with those incidents?
When I did this case first did it, I don't remember, I learned there were 10,000 homes in a city, city and county, way smaller than, certainly Baltimore is bigger than Cincinnati. 10,000 homes, not that had backups, but were ticketed for purchase. Nobody knew about it because of the problem. That will show you the dimension. My belief is that I don't know your database in Baltimore. I know how to figure those things out, but I know how to get. But I think you're dealing with a tip of the iceberg is not even the right phrase. I understand this strikes everywhere in the city, all communities, and that's the same as in Cincinnati. So you're not scraping just even the top off.
Gotcha. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? Yeah, Councilwoman Clark?
I'm not sure I'm asking the right person. Hi, Doctor. Can you hear me?
Yes, I sure can.
Okay, hi. Mary Pat Clark. I want to ask you this question. One of the problems I have is I don't know as a homeowner whether I would understand whether I was having an eligible sewage backup, eligible for the kind of reimbursement that's required. There's a lot of talk about it can't be surging. That doesn't qualify. I don't know what that means. Do you?
Most people can figure out once they learn the program, what the program is, that they've got human waste in their basement.
Yes.
And that's your first indicator, all right, that you got a problem. And
Yeah.
if you have a lot of human
We
waste.
can identify that. I've been through it 4 times. I can identify that. So far, I'm identifying number one. I was going to say number 1. It's, I guess, number 2. We know that. Now, what else about the description of
it either came from a blockage.
Yep.
I don't know your Maryland law, but it's about here. If there's a blockage in your lateral, that's between you and the street.
then you're
that
not
is your
eligible.
responsibility. Excuse me?
So then, in that case, you're not eligible for the reimbursement.
Even here in Cincinnati. The problem was the MSD, or the Metropolitan Sewer District, called everything a fault of a leaf or a piece of toilet paper blocking your lateral. That wasn't true. because they knew the truth, that this was due to lack of capacity in the line. And they know every area where there's a lack of capacity in the line. So we were able to get this program put in because that was the documented magnitude of the problem was way greater than people than had been recognized by the sewer district. Now, we happened to prove that to the judge, but it wasn't a very elaborate, it was a one-day hearing.
So it was the lack of adequacy of the infrastructure, the public infrastructure.
Right.
Okay.
You must understand, the reason the sewer district has to know about this is they're violating federal law if they don't. They know where the sanitary sewer overflows are, and sanitary sewer overflows are per se illegal under federal law.
Right. So we had to close off ours, and that forced the overcapacity of the line here.
I'm sorry, you had to do what?
We had to close off the levers or faucets or whatever were used to carry that excess out of the system when there were heavy rains. We had to close them down and force them back into people's homes because that's the only place they had left to go.
And
All
that's
right.
that's where you want to have a program that is fixing the bigger problem.
Yeah.
And while doing that, you want to not appropriate property without compensating the people in a reasonable way.
Correct. Thank you.
Sure.
No, I thank you for this conversation. It's about capacity.
Yes,
It's
it
about the public capacity.
is. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
No other, you have?
Yeah, I don't have any other questions. I just wanted to thank them. I guess you can tune in on Charm TV from here. We're going to take it off the screen. So thank you for your time. Thank you for tuning in.
My pleasure.
Oh, actually, hold on. We have one more question from the
I
committee chair.
just have one question. To piggyback on my colleague, I want to thank you for, your time and your information. Oh, thank you for your time and your information to help out Baltimore. But on a side note, since you're from Cincinnati, did you watch the game Sunday?
I want to tell you, I'm the biggest Ravens fan there is. So I did. And a 47-yard run was one of the most miraculous things I've seen. But I don't want to digress.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Ciao.
Okay. All right, so we have one more panel, and then we're going to go to DPW, agency representatives, and then open testimony. So, do you want to call them?
Go ahead.
Jennifer Kuntz, Sean Stinnett, Natasha Bach-Singleton, and Craig Bedenhausen. And I'm sorry if I said that wrong.
Yep, no, you said
Got it? Okay.
Huh?
I can start things off. Hi, everybody. My name is Jennifer Kunze, and I'm the Maryland Program Manager with Clean Water Action. And we've been involved with the problem of sewage backing up into people's homes in Baltimore City for several years. We first got engaged back in 2015 and 2016 when the initial consent decree was coming to a close. And people who were experiencing this problem all across the city, but especially up in Northwest Baltimore, were raising the alarm and demanding a better program and better responses than what currently existed at the time. What was happening back in 2015 was that all of these sewage floods were happening. It was a new problem. We went from about 600 sewage floods being reported in the city every year in the early 2000s to more than 5,000 happening in the year back in 2015. And there was this massive new problem. people were experiencing these severe financial damages and filing a claim with the law department to recoup those damages. But between 2012 and 2015, of the people who applied to the law department to get their costs reimbursed, 54% of those claims had been denied by 2015, and 37% of them remained unresolved in 2015, the majority of them having been unresolved for more than a year. And people were coming out to hearings at the Maryland Department of the Environment, to community meetings in Northwest, and put so much time into pushing for a better response to sewage backups. And the expedited reimbursement program has been a massive disappointment. We've heard already the statistics on the number of applications, the number of denials that people have seen, and the very large gap between the number of people reporting sewage backups and the number of people who actually apply. Since January, it's been a big priority for me to advertise this program, and I've spoken at more than 50 community association meetings or community events all across the city about the expedited reimbursement program and the options that people do have for this. And at the vast majority of them, people were not already aware that this might be the city's liability, that they might be able to get their costs reimbursed, that the city was under a legal agreement to reimburse certain costs with sewage backups. At most of these community meetings, people had not been informed, the community association leaders had not been informed about the expedited reimbursement program. I can't say affirmatively what is or isn't happening at every community association in the city. I can't make it to all of them, but I was never at a community meeting where information about this program was shared before I brought it up. At several community events where there was a table about sewage backups, just a general information table from DPW or the city, I never saw information about the expedited reimbursement program being shared. In fact, quite the opposite. At Artscape last July, at the Robert W. Coleman Community Association meeting this month, and to my great surprise, even right outside of this hearing room, I would see this sewer backups guide being distributed, but it doesn't mention the expedited reimbursement program. The only information in it about what to do about your financial costs is Baltimore City is not liable for unseen events, including flood damage or sewer backups. For legal clarification on matters related to a sewer backup or flooding, or to file a claim, please contact the Baltimore City Law Department. The Law Department will investigate claims for merit, but filing a claim is not a guarantee of reimbursement. That's inaccurate, outdated, misleading, and would discourage someone from going online to find out that they do have a method to get reimbursed that the city is required to do. And this kind of thing, the lack of public information, the inaccurate information, and the reports in the media about how many people are being trying to get reimbursed and being denied are so discouraging. And I think that leads to the underreporting of sewage backups and to the extremely low number of applications to the program. Because even if people find out about it, why would they apply if they know many people in their neighborhood who applied and were denied reimbursement when they shouldn't have been? And it's an extraordinarily discouraging, disheartening problem. People should not be having to go through this, and people shouldn't have to come out for hearings over and over for multiple years to try to have the city provide a program that's adequate to the severity of this problem. So please make this the last time that people have to come out to a hearing and not see this problem resolved adequately.
Sean?
Good evening. Thank you, Chairman and committee, for allowing us the opportunity to speak about this issue. My name is Sean Stinnett. I'm the president of the West Arlington Improvement Association, and I'm here to represent the residents of West Arlington. It's been a number of years, at least over 10 years, that residents within my community has been suffering with this specific issue as far as sewage backups. Whenever we have, or whenever it's heard that we're going to have a significant rainstorm, at least about 2 inches of rain, usually, particularly even the streets of Elderon, Bellevue, and Pennhurst, those are the ones that's really hit even more within West Arlington. And when I'm saying hit, I'm talking about at least 10, even at sometimes 15 inches of sewage water, which in that particular case, it takes at least a couple of days for it to actually to recede. From that point, of course, you go through the process of responding within 24 hours. However, just like I mentioned outside earlier this evening, that sometimes just with the lack of hope or lack of response as far as DPW has provided, a lot of cases have gone undocumented because of just the denials after denials after denials. I have several family members that live within West Arlington, and they've have gone through every measure that the city has suggested, with meaning installed new sub pumps, installed backflow diverters, and still go through the same process as far as with their sewage backup. So it's gotten to the point that a lot of residents that feel that it's no ending situation or no final solution, and especially when it comes to times that they're not really hearing or not allowing the opportunity to really get some significant feedback on why their claims are being denied. So that's probably the main reason why a number of claims have gone undocumented. Once at least about 3 years ago, once I became president, I would say, actually, let me step back. Back in 2014, when the problems were really increasing as far as not only within West Arlington, Grove Park, and Dolefield, and so forth, then Councilwoman Ricky Spector and Councilwoman Sharon Green Middleton, they had sort of a community meeting with a number of people within those areas down at the Grove Park site. And that's when a lot of them started to address as far as a lot of the concerns. So that's when initially where the conversation started to begin. However, still, there was the problem of as far as not giving a significant response. Maybe about a year after I became, well, at least about 2 years after I became president of the West Arlington Community Association, that I reached out to Mr. Chow. And fortunately, it did have a few correspondence with him in regards to this issue. However, when one of the responses that he had given me, which I do have a copy and I'll provide that later on, that he did thank me as far as for reaching out. And he said by copy of this email, he attached several individuals within the email to actually follow it with me for a response after they proceed with an investigation. And those individuals was Miss, excuse me if I mispronounce the person's name, Miss Sewage, which is the Chief of Engineering and Construction, Mr. Espinoza, who's the Chief of Asset Management, and Mr. DeSantis, the Chief of Legal and Regulatory Affairs, to investigate and make contact with you. And this is Mr. Chow. And this was on June 4th, 2018. From this letter, that's the last response that I got from anyone, and never got a response for those individuals that he had copied on. So from that point, of course, me giving that information to the community was very disappointing, but then never got a response. Followed up with another email to Mr. Chow in July after we had another significant rainstorm, because in in 2018, we had a lot of rain during that course of year, so the grounds were very, very saturated. And even when I had sent them pictures of, sewage at least about, 10 inches or more, still got no response from Mr. Chow or even from the individuals that he's copied. So we get to the point that, like I said, I mean, we're dealing with, as far as within West Arlington, we're dealing with a lot of issues, not only just sewage backups, I mean, crime, just overall public safety, prostitution and so forth. And just for as far as to deal with, when homeowners come at home and then have to actually take off of work and spend time as far as has to go through this process of getting things clean. And in my neighborhood is overall, it's a senior community. It's a majority of people that are retired on fixed incomes, and if getting to the point that one, not even at least getting this, reimbursement, even though at times it's really not enough, but it can help. I mean, $1, even if it's $1, it helps something, and it's something. But however, just not get, just overall get denied, that's a problem. One of my, in the close, one of my residents actually took it one more time and actually applied and see if, they would get reimbursed. But of course, after, and the op-ed piece was in the Baltimore Sun not too long ago, suddenly we got a call from a lobbyist, then we got a call from the mayor, and then an individual got reimbursed after maybe the 5th time as far as applying. But all of a sudden, just like that, from the mayor responding, Mayor Young at that, it was the individual got reimbursed. So to me, it's a
be that way.
no, it should not be that way. It should not be way. It should not be that challenging as far as just to being reimbursed of something that, of course, clearly it's at least as far as for that homeowner doing the things that they need to do, or at least supposed to be getting done, knowing that there's not a blockage in the house, that it's coming from the outside and it's nothing but sewage. At least to give a favorable response. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Natasha Box-Singleton.
First of all, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councilman Burnett, for having this hearing. And most importantly, from my heart, thank you, Councilman Burnett, for the support that you provided to our community members. For those of you that don't know, I'm Natasha Box-Singleton. I have the community of Violetville and St. Agnes. We are located in District 10. We are at kind of the crossroads of the Maiden Choice River and a lovely little stream we like to call the Gregor Stream. And we never had any sewer backup problems until late 2017, 2018, and DPW decided to close off those outfalls. Yeah. So if you guys wondered where the sewage went, it's probably my basement. So I have been a Baltimore City resident and a community leader. We bought our home in Violetville about 17 years ago. And for the last 2 years, we've had to deal with this both as a resident, a homeowner, a landlord, and a community leader. Because it's new to us, we didn't really know what we were doing. We jumped on it fast, and we were very lucky that we had Councilman Burnett to help us. We got in touch with organizations like the Maryland Insurance Administration. I was actually the person that introduced Joy Hatchett to this program, because when we got flooded, we pulled everybody we could think of into a meeting to talk about it and figure out what to do. We implemented a process where we went around and we canvassed the whole neighborhood. We identified every house that we thought had a sewage backup. We helped them get discounts on putting in backflow preventers to prevent it from happening again. We helped everybody go through that reimbursement process. We made sure that everyone was aware of the reimbursement process, the expedited reimbursement process, and the appeal process, and backflow preventer valve. Yeah, my former husband was a plumber, so I had some really good knowledge about it, and really great discounts on supplies. So we made sure anytime it rained, we were telling everybody on Twitter, on Facebook, going door to door, knocking on people's houses when we knew that they weren't on social media, telling them, call 311 now because you had a sewage backup last time. We want to make sure you're not denied because you don't meet that 24-hour time frame. Even after doing all of that, walking every single applicant through the process, if they asked for help, everyone was still denied. We had people who were denied because there were claims that they didn't call 311 ahead of time. So we had data people go into Open Baltimore, pull that SR number, pull the data, pull the address, and then submit that back to DPW, and those claims were still denied. We managed on our own as a community to get volunteers with a lot of help from Councilman Burnett to clean up all those messes on our own and to implement practices so that we didn't have more basement sewer backups. So knock on wood, we haven't had a big problem the way that we did during those two 100-year floods back in 2018. The houses that were at most risk all have those backflow preventer valves installed. Some of them actually have two. one inside the home and one outside the home. That cost, at face value, that's about $5,000 just to have that done. If you have really good connections with supplies and you have plumbers in your community and you have neighbors that are willing to help or family, you can get it done a little bit cheaper, but that is a significant cost that's not included in the reimbursement. So as a community, we managed to get all of this done on our own, and we were pretty hopeful that going through this expedited reimbursement process, we'd get some of this money back because everybody documented everything. Everybody knew from Councilman Burnett's workshops that he opened up to all the communities that we needed to have on protective clothing. We needed gloves, we needed masks, we needed bleach. We had to clean everything and make sure that it was sanitary. So there were people that had gone out and actually put out money to make sure that they were cleaning it up in a sanitary manner, who had contracted vendors to come in and do that cleaning. By the way, the cheapest quote that we got for cleaning was $3,500. So even the $2,500 cap doesn't cover cleaning. So we did this in hopes that eventually following the expedited reimbursement process would get us to the point where the city process worked. Because as a city, you guys should be making database decisions, right? You've got a database there with Open Baltimore. You can see how many people called in to 311 to tell you that they had sewer water in their basement. If you don't want to look it up right now, I can tell you it was 54 in Violetville and St. Agnes in 2018. So those 54 times that people called in, those are times that the homeowner or volunteers went and cleaned that up. So all of that leads to a need to really make a concise process that covers everything. You've heard from all of the experts. You've heard from the doctor from Hopkins. This is a human waste hazard. You know, we have volunteers, and I heard the gentleman from Cincinnati say you don't want people and their kids going down to clean it up. Well, we had people and their kids going down volunteering to clean it up. When you look at who you can get to volunteer, you're taking teens, you're taking students, you're taking Boys and Girl Scouts. And again, thankfully, because Councilman Burnett had all of that information available for us, we had them all protected, but we had to take kids down into basements and clean up human shit. I know that you're gonna censor that, but that's what it is. It was fecal matter, it was feces, it was scat, it was poo. And what we really need to do is we need to address those three things that he identified. And the number one thing was that direct assisted cleaning. So when we asked for help, when we asked for DPW to come in and help us clean up, the answer that we got back from our councilmen was that dumpsters are usually reserved for community cleanups. We managed to reschedule a community cleanup. You know, we renamed it community cleanup, and we had kids with carts and rain boots and gloves, and they were cleaning out people's basements and putting the stuff in the dumpster. Yeah, I wish I could take that face, Councilwoman Sneed, and put it on paper. It's, when you think about this, you're thinking about human waste in your basement and how do you clean that up. And then when you think about the subsequent cost, so now that we've had kids cleaning up poo, how many of those kids are going to miss school because they got sick? How many of those kids are going to be on medical assistance in the hospital? How many of those kids are going to be in the hospital without insurance, and that's going to be charged off? So you've got St. Agnes now charging off all of those bills. We really need direct assistance from DPW to clean up those houses where people have reported water in their basement that's coming from the sewage. And then because we're thinking about West Baltimore, how many of those houses are vacant? So we, thankfully, in Violetville and St. Agnes, we don't have a single vacant house. We have underutilized houses. That's what we call them. They're vacant. Don't tell anybody. You know, ways and means, we managed to identify those underutilized houses and go inside and clean them the same way we did every other house. But how many community in West Baltimore is going to do that? So at this very moment, how many houses in West Baltimore have human poo in the basement?
Any questions?
He's telling me to wrap up. So I really urge you, just that direct assistance is what's needed in the program.
So that's for the experts, but no.
Use the microphone, Councilwoman.
So one of the questions that I had, I'm just at this point, we want to prevent this from happening from anyone and to anybody. And so I'm just wondering, why don't we, open some of these tanks back up so it will prevent from going back in? And then I'm also wondering, when you talked about the preventative valve, the backflow preventative valve, I wonder if that should be installed in houses moving forward, like new homes that are built, so it's mandatory, I'm guessing. So if we're going to continuously have this rain, the climate's not changing, it's going to get worse.
So I can tell you that backflow preventer information, I was aware of it because, again, my husband was a plumber, but Councilman Burnett provided us with documentation that came from the Red Cross and FEMA about how to prevent flooding. And that was one of the #1 recommendations, was to install a backflow preventer valve. It's not very cheap because a lot of these houses are sitting on concrete, and you have to grind down into that concrete, dig it up, install it, and it makes a huge mess, all of that concrete dust. Okay. But it can be done. Like I said, we have 2 in a lot of the houses at $5,000 each.
Councilwoman Sneed, that may be a good question when we bring up DPW agency to ask them. Councilwoman Clark?
Yeah, now this is really Councilwoman Sneed's suggestion or question, but it's mine too. I listened to her. So here the city closed down valves that were where the wastewater or the stormwater, something went, when there was an overcapacity in the line. So what they did was they closed all those escape hatches near you, for example.
I'm not sure where they're closed.
Oh, well,
I just
maybe
know
it
that
was somebody else who, but okay.
I just know that once they closed
Once they closed them,
we had the problem.
this is what happened.
So I think that is a DPW question.
And so I think it is, because this water's ending up in the same place anyway. It's not like that prevented anything from going into the harbor, okay? It's going there anyway.
Well,
it's just blowing up in basements first and then going back out, and when the surge is over, it's going where it was going to go in the first place. Why are we closing all of these valves at the same time and watching them?
Let's hold it for DPW.
Okay, but I need to say it now because I
go
have
ahead.
to be. So why are we doing this when we know that the water, the polluted water, the wastewater, has to go someplace, and the stormwater has to go someplace, and it's all going to the same place in the long run, but in the meantime, we know it's going into people's houses at a rate many, many, many times more than the norm before those valves were closed. So why don't we open those valves until we correct, as everybody says we're going to do, that problem of overcapacity, and then close those valves if we want to, because somehow they're going to build something that's going to change all this, and it's going to take a couple years to do. But why, in the meantime, because the water's going into people's houses, destroying parts of their houses, and then ending up back where it was going to go anyway in overflow valves, downstream and into the harbor and the bay. I mean, really.
Councilwoman, Councilwoman Clark, I think that you and Councilwoman Sneed have a good question and statement, so when we bring up DPW, remember those questions.
Oh, we won't forget them.
All right.
It's like, really? I'm ready to go out and open them up right now on the way to my next meeting.
Okay, so I want to give our last panelist an opportunity, Mr. Bettenhausen, and then we'll jump right in to DPW. Yep.
This is my district.
Hi, my name is Craig Bedenhausen. Thank you for having us here today and looking at this issue. I'm here from the Church of the Guardian Angel, which is a small Episcopal congregation up in Remington, a couple blocks south of Johns Hopkins campus. And I want to tell you what's been happening to us. Because the building, we call it Cromer Hall after the first priest there. It's been there for about 100 years, got 1923 written on the side of the building. We've never had a problem. There's no record and no one that's been working there or going there has any remembrance of any backflow issues in the building until August 24th, when we were doing a backpack giveaway for the local school kids at Margaret Brent. And I came in and it smelled odd. It's a smell I recognized from my tours of the wastewater treatment facilities here in Baltimore. And then people came up from downstairs. So in the basement of Cromer Hall is our thrift shop. It's run by a group of old ladies mostly and a few younger people and a couple of older men. And they said, Craig, you got to come downstairs. Something's going on in the thrift shop. And I come downstairs, and yeah, it's maybe a couple of hundred, several hundred gallons of raw sewage on the floor of the thrift shop. It had been, you could tell from the pattern in the solid waste that it had blasted out of the toilets and then filled the whole place. Basically, it was about over the top of my shoe in an area of a couple of hundred, 600-700 square feet, area. So, I got down there and I told, the little old ladies to please stop mopping it up. And me and one of the community volunteers started sucking it out of the basement with a shop vac. You can see that shop vac in here in this photo. This is actually not from that incident though. Because so we called it into the city as a backflow. We got as much of the bulk water out as we could because we knew that removing bulk water is one of the most expensive parts of these kind of restoration efforts. And then we did call in a restoration company to do the rest of the cleanup. Lost, many pieces of merchandise that could have been sold to, and the thrift shop proceeds support the food pantry. So that's where that money would have gone and instead went down the toilet. And then the city closed the ticket. They said that, which I assumed it took, and they'd figured out the problem. They had gone in the lines and found it. And so we went about business as normal. And then on October 28th, I came in on, I think that was the Monday, and that smell was back. It had happened again. So we did the same thing again, except this time it was just me. I didn't call any help. And I know that I should have called the insurance company from the get-go, and I shouldn't have been trying to handle that myself. But I went down there, and I saw this muck, this human waste, old and new, and it was bubbling. And I could not let that just sit in the basement of my church when I knew that people were going to be coming in that week to get stuff from the food pantry upstairs and to have community and have a nice time. So then at that point, after I got the bulk water sucked out that second time, I did call the insurance company and brought in another professional restoration company. And the city came out that time and they inspected the lines. They even put a camera down there, I think, and once again they said they didn't find any obstruction. And right as the cleaning crew was finishing up on Tuesday, then that Wednesday was Halloween, and you remember there was another big rain then. And we got hit again. I don't know, I'm terrified by your testimony that people got backflow valve preventers and it's still happening, because that's our plan. We're getting some backflow valves and put in place this week, I hope. I'm terrified every time it rains. I'm going to go into my church and find the thrift store filled with sewage again. The thrift store's been closed for 2 weeks now. It's going to be hopefully reopening on the 23rd. We've lost a ton of stuff in the thrift store that would have been sold to support the food pantry. I've obviously endangered my own health, apparently, more than I realized from the testimony from the gentleman earlier. And one of the things that I want to highlight about this is we're not covered under the program, the reimbursement program, at all. We have insurance and we're using the insurance, but there's going to be a huge deductible. The insurance company won't cover the backflow valve preventers. And we're not a big church. We're not a rich church. There's a reason we run a thrift store to try and support the food pantry. This isn't going to break us this time, but a couple more and it probably would. We'd probably have to shut our doors at least to the food pantry and to the thrift shop. Something has changed in our part of the city line. This is the 27th Street sewage line, possibly also the one that runs down Lorraine Avenue. Something has changed very recently, and the system is failing. It's no longer adequately removing the sewage, and it's only during rainstorms that we had the plumber come out and check the lines. Our lines are clear. There shouldn't be that much stormwater in the sanitary lines, and the city needs to be doing something to fix this problem, or organizations like mine are going to be destroyed. And in addition to our organization, in addition to our church, there's a couple hundred houses on our street. I went up the street and I talked to them, and they've been having some of the same problems. One of my neighbors I've known for a long time said he got several early this year, and then their landlord did put in a backflow valve and stop it. One of the other things to highlight is, you can't quite tell in this photo, but we have a concrete floor here. Most of the houses in Remington have packed dirt floors. So good luck getting that clean. It's a huge problem. I'm glad to see the City Council is taking some interest in solving it in a long-term way, because it's, it's going to ruin a lot of people.
Thank you for your testimony. Councilwoman Clark, yeah, go ahead.
Actually, the church is in Councilman, is in the 12th district, but I'm across the street, so. Huh? Oh, yeah. But I wanted to tell the council and the people here, this is a disaster at this church, and it fills with, I mean, it is disgusting, and it has happened these 3 times in a row after 100 years in which all recorded history has not mentioned a backup flood of wastewater like this in that church. So what I wanted to mention was, Craig's wonderful. He's, what's your title? Like sexton?
I'm the junior warden, which is like fancy church talk for head of the property committee.
Well, and he has a full-time job also besides that. But I want to tell you that when the city crews turned out, now this is the 3rd time in a row, Craig has a pretty good theory about what's wrong, but I was impressed with how hard they worked when they got there to try to figure out what in the world is causing this in this church. And they didn't have a big enough TV camera. They sent and brought a bigger one out. They brought out everything they had, because this is the 3rd time in a row they can see that the thrift shop is wiped out. That also affects the food program. I mean, just think about that for a minute. And the whole church and community, because this is a place the community depends on and has for those 100 years. Now, I haven't been there all that time, but people tell me. And so I just want to put in a pitch for the crews and how sincere and hard and long they came to this site to try to solve it and can't, because it's not about just a blockage someplace. It's about closing off escape hatches and sending the water indoors instead. And I think we need to face that. If that's a solution, open them up, because they're going to the same place anyway. Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank you, Councilwoman. At this time, we're going to go into agency reports, and the first agency is Public Works. And who's here to represent DPW?
Deputy Director Garbart.
Okay, you've been here, you've heard the testimony.
Yes, sir.
The problem, and I'll make it quick, the problem isn't the city crews, the men and women that come out into the streets, but I know that the sponsor, Councilman Burnett, has a list of questions that he sent to DPW, and he still has, but I think there's 2 questions from Councilwoman Sneed, if she still wants to ask those questions, and Councilwoman Clark. Councilwoman Sneed, you want to use the microphone?
Yes, Councilwoman, I did, and I'm Matthew Garbart, Deputy Director of the Department of Public Works. I'm joined with Paul DeSantis, who's the Chief of Legal and Regulatory Affairs, and he's much more knowledgeable on this, so I might ask him to respond to some of the questions, if that's possible.
Go ahead.
But the specific question was on the outfall, the structure. Why aren't they opened, or why don't we open them? Well, and Paul can speak more to this. We were forced by EPA and the state regulators at the time, as part of the original consent decree, to close those things. That, as was said, forced them back into where water goes, which is the least, the least wherever it can go, which is unfortunately up into people's bathrooms and basements and other things. Certainly that would be a solution. That would require, though, and Paul can correct me if I'm wrong, getting approval from the Environmental Protection Agency and the Maryland Department of Environment. I'm sorry?
Now, go ahead, we're live, you gotta
Okay.
record it. Go ahead.
So that we would have to ask them and would be subject to them approving it or not. I think the original concern was from the overflows that flowed into the streams, that was contaminating the water. But I believe, to Councilwoman Clark's point, if it's going there anyway, what's that difference? But there would be a regulatory process we'd have to go through to get approval from that, but that is certainly one option. Paul, do you want to add anything more to that?
I mean, I can go through the history.
Yeah. Would you like a brief history of what we've done or where these things came from? Would that be helpful? Or?
Synopsis, I mean, I know you're implementing a plan that's gonna be like 80% of the.
Yeah. So we have a water system, wastewater system, and stormwater system. It's our wastewater system, we're fortunate enough to have a completely separate wastewater system. Other older cities in the United States have a combined sanitary system, which means that stormwater and sewer go into the same system, and then if there's an overflow, both of that is in the same system and then goes into a stream or outfall or something like that. We have a separate system, which is very good. We're very fortunate for that, but because it's so old, 70% are over 50 years old. There's cracks, the seals are leaking, they're failing. We recognize that. And water gets in from storms, from groundwater, and then it overflows the wastewater pipes. In addition to that, that's bad enough, but in addition to that, we've recognized that there's a hydraulic restriction. So basically, it's if there's a funnel and you pour too fast or too much, it overflows. So the line itself can't handle the volume going through that. One of the biggest pinch points was at the Back River Wastewater Treatment Facility, which is the larger of our two facilities. Right at the head where it comes in, there was a massive backup. It was actually a 10-mile backup underground in the sewage system when it rains. So we are undergoing, it's called the Headworks Project. It's a $500 million project, $400 billion, which is completely re-engineering that. It's going to actually pump all of that waste up into large holding tanks and also have massive pumps that's going to then feed that, so that we believe from our hydraulic model, as well as talking with regulators and others, that will address over 80% of overflows from sewage, the volume of it. So not every single incident of it, but the overall volume of overflows. But that doesn't address the other issues of the pipes themselves. If it's overflowing because of an issue right in someone's neighborhood, that's still definitely going to exist. So I want to stress this program, this was a pilot program. It never existed before. We are very open to talking, to learning. We've heard everyone here. We are very understanding that there are clear health consequences and concerns. That is absolutely proven. There's no issue there. There's no comment there. And we're always willing to look from new ideas, new concepts, and work with those to try to get something right. But I just want to stress, though, that we would need to look at the specific considerations in the city versus other cities. Paul, do you want to? Sure. Yeah.
Councilman Pinkett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just real quick, I'm just not. I'm not a professional on this, obviously, but I'm just going to make an assumption that opening the outfalls back up, that can't be an option. I mean, why would the EPA, MDE tell us to close it, to just open them back up and then with assurance let the waste go right into the streams, the Jones Falls or whatever? So my assumption is that they forced us to close it because the expectation was that we would fix the system appropriately so that not only would it not go into the streams, but it also wouldn't back up into people's homes. So can you, one, tell us, okay, what is the cost to fix the system so that we don't have this? And then also, what kind of support are we getting from the state or federal government to help address this issue?
Sure. No monetary support from the state or federal government. They do.
You said no monetary support from the state or federal
for those
government.
Specific issues. There are funding mechanisms. We have WIFIA, which we have been the lucky recipients of WIFIA funding for, like, the Headworks project and a few other projects that will save the people of Baltimore a significant amount of money. The repayment rate for a WIFIA loan is much lower than if we had to issue bonds. So we have been the beneficiaries of that. There are also state revolving funds, which we apply for and utilize for our construction projects to help rehabilitate our sanitary sewer system. So that ends up being a monetary savings as well. But they are repayment, they're loans, but it is a 2% repayment rate, whereas if it was we are issuing bonds, it would be a significant cost increase.
So do we have a figure on what we anticipate the cost of fixing the system? So
Yep, $2.6 billion, and that is only for the first phase of the rehabilitation. So, and I'll kind of walk through here. So I first want to reiterate that. So as it was Dr. Altman, was that his name? Dr. Altman?
Dr. Altman.
As he was noting, not everything is caused by the city. It's not all a city liability issue. So we have, here a typical house connection, and the little pointer is not going to get that far, but the liability for the city ends at the property line. From the property line in is a responsibility of the homeowner. If there are clogs, if there are root intrusions there, that is not something that the city is going to be responsible for. There's also a distinction between surcharging, what we've been talking about today with the reimbursement program, which is a capacity-related issue. As it rains and there are stormwater, clear water getting into
the mic.
Oh, sorry. As it rains and we have clear water, stormwater getting into the system either through groundwater infiltration or through other inputs, through cracks or whatever, then that can create a capacity issue. That is distinct from, let's say, a choke, which is a blockage in the line, which can be the result of the inappropriate flushing of fats, oils, and grease. We had our fatberg in Baltimore. So, those sorts of things are more of a maintenance issue. It's a misuse of our system, frankly. And so those are not covered under this. So we want to be mindful of that. But going back in history, so in 2002, Baltimore City was sued by the Environmental Protection Agency and Maryland Department of the Environment with the Department of Justice. We had a significant amount of sanitary sewer overflows. That is illegal under the Clean Water Act. That untreated sewage gets into our surface waters or streams or rivers, and that is something that is not permitted under federal law. So we were sued. We entered into a consent decree in 2002, and that 2002 consent decree essentially set out a number of projects that we would have to undertake. So it was basically a list of projects with deadlines, and it required us to close down structured overflows. So those were essentially open outfalls into our system, elevated a little bit above where the normal sewer line would be. So as the sewer was hitting capacity, it would raise up and it would be able to discharge to our rivers, to our systems. So that was part of that. And we realized, and we also had to, under that initial consent decree, establish a hydraulic model. So we had to study our sewer sheds. We had to create a model to better capture how our system functions. So it better informs us in our decision making when we're entering into projects, when we're designing things going forward. It was a good idea. But what we realized as we were going through, our system was not functioning the way the hydraulic model would have suggested it should have. And what we found was a massive hydraulic restriction at Back River. So essentially you have Back River up here, the pipe coming in was lower. So you have to build up a hydraulic head to push the sewage into Back River. And what was necessary for that hydraulic head to be established was essentially that in the chart, that pink area is what was necessary to establish a hydraulic head. There is essentially sewage in that area in our pipes, and the blue dot is Back River. So, this was a game changer for us. We had to then sit back down with EPA and MDE, and we had to rethink what our strategy was for addressing these issues. We have entered into a modified consent decree. And that was entered into on October 6, 2017. And it gives us more time to do projects. By having more time, we can do them in a more cost-effective manner. I'm sorry. I really have to lean into this. By having more time, we can do these projects in a more cost-effective manner. We have a limited number of contractors who can do this work. So if we simply can't have everybody doing all the jobs at once. So, that would have to be expedited. So we would end up spending more money on those projects. But we have extended the time period. But what we're really doing is we're going to do more for the system. We've broken it into 2 phases. So we have phase 1, which is essentially those projects that were set forth in the 2002 consent decree. And we've added a few projects like the Headworks project, which addresses that hydraulic restriction at Back River. And then we move into phase 2. What we're doing is we're establishing an actual performance standard for our system. It's based on a level of protection. And so once we complete our phase 1 projects, we are going to evaluate the effects of those. Those will remediate a lot of the system. We're doing a lot of sewer relining to eliminate or reduce the amount of stormwater that's getting into the system. We'll evaluate the effects of the system using our hydraulic model. We'll recalibrate it at that time as well, ground truth it based on actual weather events. And then we're going to design additional projects. So over and on top of the $2.6 billion that we're working on right now, we're going to design additional projects to upsize pipes if we have capacity limited areas. So where we know that we have not resolved capacity issues through phase 1, we're going to address that in phase 2. So this is a hydraulic model, and you can see those are the areas mapped out that are input into the hydraulic model. We have added other areas where, through studies, through a 5-year look back into basement backups, we have, identified areas that are capacity limited, and we have added additional areas into the system, but it's generally speaking, it's 10-inch pipes and larger. So it covers about a third of the system, and there are areas where we have 8-inch pipes. But the hydraulic model really is used to establish that performance baseline for our system. It supports the designs of our projects, and it can be used to, in the case of the expedited reimbursement program, we can actually tell if it is a pipe system that is in the hydraulic model. We can tell if there would be surcharging or not.
Yes, I apologize for interrupting. We have the presentation, which is 18 pages long. There's some questions that my colleagues have to ask and the sponsor of the bill. Before I turn it over, I just want to say that what's unacceptable, as far as I'm concerned, is that you're looking at phase 1 and phase 2 of 2021 and 2030. The consent decree, and I'm not going to get into a debate, is that the consent decree was 2002, and here we are at 2019. And I just think it's unacceptable that for 17 years, you know, DPW sat there and to correct this issue, okay? So at this time, Councilman, you finished?
I had a couple other questions, but I mean, you hit on the first is that, you know, the consent decree is from 2002, and here we are with a plan that hopefully gets us where we need to be in 2030.
Yeah.
But I do have a question, even as it relates to our response to an issue. Do we have a specific time, you know, once DPW is made aware of the backflow, that we are, I guess we hold ourselves to a certain standard by what time we should respond to that incident?
And let me clarify, for sending an investigator out or for responding to a application for reimbursement?
I guess it's really to begin the remediation or cleanup. I mean, if
And it is a reimbursement program, so we don't do the cleanup.
Okay.
But yes, so if there is a call to 311, we have an emergency response plan, which is filed with MDE and EPA. It's a public document. I believe it is on our website as well. We will respond within 48 hours. We generally will respond much quicker than that. Our response times that I've seen are generally within 24 hours. So at that point when so there's a call to 311.
So let me back up. So say someone calls 311 and about the, what's the time between when somebody calls 311 and somebody from DPW goes out to that person's house?
Yeah, the response time we've seen is, so you call 311, a service request is made, and then investigators goes out, and we generally see response times within 24 hours.
Within 24 hours?
Yeah.
And the reason I'm asking is when I looked at Dr. Altman's report from Cincinnati, and I know we're not Cincinnati, but for example, they say when the call center receives a customer request for assistance with the sewage backup, a customer service representative is, in most circumstances, required to respond and be on site at the affected property within 4 hours.
Yeah, and I
mean, that's like the way we are, and we should respond to constituents in the city. I mean, that means that, to me, that says that we prioritize you, we prioritize your request. I'll get to you in 24 hours, to me, doesn't, even without having the same program that Cincinnati has, doesn't say to me that that we've placed the level of urgency that we should on this public health issue.
And I'm being conservative. I haven't analyzed the numbers to see what our response times are, but I know they shoot for much less. But I'm not going to stand here and tell you if I haven't gone through.
Do we know what our average response time is?
I don't. We can analyze that and get back to you. But I can tell you from looking at service requests, I generally am seeing within 24 hours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilman Burnett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, sir, for your patience and through this lengthy hearing, and to your team for coming tonight. So I'm going to bounce around. I know we sent a number of questions ahead, but some of them have been covered and are covered in the PowerPoint given to the committee, and if members of the public, I'm sure we can give it out, that relates to the advertising of the programs. I'm not going to ask questions about that, but it is in here. So one of the things that was mentioned earlier was one sort of this larger issue at the Back River plant, and that being given priority. But you know, you have two council members here representing West Baltimore, of which it was stated earlier that that those repairs do not help residents in West Baltimore. Can you speak to why there have not been additional targeted repairs to help people who live in the west side of the city?
Yeah, and there have been. So Mr. Stinnett would be a good example. He lives in West Arlington. He lives, I believe, on Elderon. I believe that's what he said. So Elderon, we know, is a capacity-limited area. We went in and actually installed backflow preventers for the community in that area. And we had a phase 2 project that we could move up. It was hydraulically separate, and we had the capability of doing that. So we actually made capital improvement funds available, and we are doing that phase 2 project now. So as we speak, there is a contract going on where they're upsizing the pipes.
In West Arlington.
Correct. On Eldron.
Right. So, but I think there's sort of what I've been able to piece together from both testimony and my experience in working with constituents in other parts of West Baltimore is, one, that the backflow preventers are essentially a Band-Aid to a larger systemic issue.
Correct.
So I'm glad that's been done, but it doesn't appear to have been done to a very large scale for West Baltimore residents, nor have we heard large capital improvements for West Baltimore residents beyond what you described in West Arlington, which is great, and I'm not trying to take away from that. Clearly, there's a number of residents here from Northwest Baltimore that do need that relief.
Sure.
But there are large swaths of West Baltimore that I haven't heard plans to remediate those concerns from a systemic level.
And those would be engineering decisions, right? That's going to be informed by the hydraulic model from our 5-year look back and to see where we've had those issues in the past. And, the projects are going to be planned to address, known issues in the system. It might be that we have phase 2 or will have phase 2 projects scheduled for those areas, but we just haven't gotten to begin those yet because we're not at the end of phase 1. So it could be that these are going to be areas which will be touched by phase 2. We're just not quite there yet. We don't have the ability to move up everything. You have to sort of address and get through phase 1 before we can determine what is needed to meet that performance standard for the system.
So, and I'll note that in the materials you provided, just for the record, phase 2 is 2030.
No, the end of phase 2 is 2030, but yeah,
right.
But will be
the end of the deadline for phase 1 is 2021.
Correct.
So we're saying essentially there'll be an additional minimum of 2 years before the completion of phase 1, and then the start of phase 2 could extend another 9 years out.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. So I want to bring the focus back to the reimbursement program itself. And the modified consent decree states that the pilot program shall have annual funding for reimbursement of costs of at least $2 million. However, the agency's quarterly report show that less than $15,000 has been paid out to residents since the reimbursement program started. What happened to the other $1,985,000 set aside each year for the reimbursement program?
So these are ratepayer funds that are put aside. It's what we get in from water bills. We are, running on an enterprise fund. So, we're not to make a profit. These are funds that would stay in an account, and that account would be refreshed at the beginning of every year to come to $2 million again.
That's not acceptable, but go ahead.
Okay, so they're sitting in an account year to year.
Correct. And look, I get the frustration. We have to properly spend and protect those ratepayer funds, and we pay them out when we can determine and verify that there is a capacity-related event that qualifies for the system. We are an executive branch agency. One of the things we have to do in implementing a program is make sure that we are adhering to the standards and not making arbitrary and capricious decisions. So, when we find and can verify that a backup is based on a verified capacity issue, we pay it out.
So, just so we're clear, are you saying that the money is being spent on other projects?
It is in a fund for this, and if we spend $15,000 this year, we will add $15,000 to it to make sure it's at $2 million at the beginning of every year.
So the money's not being used for any other projects?
No, because the moment we need to keep $2 million for the year, right? And so when the new year comes, we have to make sure $2 million is in that account again. So we'll increase the money up to $2 million again.
But it can only be used for?
It has to be set aside for this program.
Okay, and it rolls over year to year?
It doesn't increase, it stays at $2 million per year. So it's not going to go to $4 million in year 2. It's going to be $2 million every year.
So are we using the $2 million every year then? So if you once you use it all, then you re-up the following year, right?
Correct. If we used up the $2 million, we would have to deny applications after the point the funds were used up, and then the next year we would add $2 million again.
But are we clearing this late though, each year though? So are we spending it down to the $0?
We're not. We're not. We do not get enough applications in to pay it down.
But it said in the record that we have over, I don't know how many applications.
We have had, per our records, 4,000 basement backups. We've had 76 to-date applications for the reimbursement program.
Is there anyone here from the Finance Department?
Yeah, go ahead. Let's pick them up, man. Go ahead.
Can you come up?
Question. Go ahead.
Good evening, Mira, Budget Office.
Okay. Is this fund audited? Or has it been audited?
I don't know the answer to that. Do you know if it's been audited? The DPW recently had a audit of the water fund. It would have included this. It's not a segregated fund set aside. It's included in the whole enterprise that is the water sewage, 2 different funds, the water fund and the sewer fund. But this funding is not a set aside in a dedicated fund. It's part of the overall enterprise budget.
Yeah, I think we need more information here. It seems like there's something missing that we're not being told. When we talk, because you almost have an incentive to not spend the money every year by essentially, I mean, I'll go back to what's provided in here related to advertising of the program. I mean, it sounds like it's online and was sent out this month in water bills, and then one time in 2018, of which is a little bit disappointing considering how frequent this is occurring. And seems almost inadequate given the number of applications at the scale of which we know the incidents are occurring, which is in the thousands. So, and I think I have some suspicion that the funds are being used for some other purpose, and would like additional, and we've talked about recessing this hearing, so would like the chairman to do that, and to have an additional conversation around from finance and the budget department around a little bit more detail on the use of these funds, because I'm missing something here, and I think members of the committee are missing something here as to where the money's going, what it's being used for, and because clearly it's not going to reimburse residents, and there's almost something feels right. So I think while we didn't send this to you ahead of time to come prepared to talk, I would like to know, and then on behalf, I guess I can't ask questions on behalf of the committee because I'm not on it, but I think it would be helpful for us to get additional information on the auditing of this fund and oversight of this particular program.
Understood. And again, I don't think this is a dedicated fund. There's not a fund called the assistance program. It's all appropriated within the general water.
So would there be anything preventing them from using this fund for other uses on an annual basis, as long as at the end of the year there's a $2 million line item at the end of the year?
Again, it's not a dedicated fund, so these funds aren't protected or sequestered in a special fund. It's part of the overall enterprise fund for the sewer and water department. It is not, they're not set aside as
So it can be used for something
protected
else.
funds. The budget appropriation could effectively be used, but again, it's just a budget appropriation. It's not dedicated funding set aside in a segregated, dedicated fund. It is a line within the overall water and sewer budget.
Correct. So to answer the question, hypothetically, it could be used for another
Budget
purpose.
appropriation could be used for, yes, correct, because it's not a set aside funding.
We don't know that.
But it's not a protected source of funding like the Affordable Housing Trust Fund or the Youth Fund, for example. Those are legislated funds set aside for a specific purpose. It's not set up that way as that type of fund.
Are the I'll ask the question at the next hearing, but I have questions about the use of funds for, there has to be another purpose here, something else we're missing. I'm not understanding if the funds can only be used for reimbursement, yet there's very limited advertising and usage of this program. I'm missing something. Something's missing here. But I will get into that.
Yeah. We're gonna, when the time comes, we're gonna recess. It was a good question. I mean, what you're telling us, and we'll have another informational hearing. But just to rewind, it's not used as a supplemental to another agency, okay? But it's mandated regards to DPW that if they hypothetically needed money for something else, another line item, they could use that. If you can't answer that, then we'll.
In theory, but again, it's not that fund wasn't set up legislatively, so there's no legislative protection. It is not isolated funding within the sewer and water budget. It is again a line item. So yes, you budget for a certain spending level, you spend above that or below that, and because it's an enterprise fund, any leftover funding remains in the fund and fund balance going into the next year.
So what, I mean, I think what the councilman says, so we can move on with his questions, that we're gonna bring you back in finance and do an audit and see is that what you wanna know?
Yeah, I'd like to know a little bit more in detail on this. So I want to ask a few questions about, unless my colleagues have anything else on that.
I do, but.
Oh, go for it. Just stay there, because I was going to ask questions about like eligibility, program determination, that kind of stuff.
I'm good.
Okay.
I'll follow your lead.
Okay. All right. Sorry, we sent you a lot here. So when we're talking about the administration of the program, is the burden of the proof on a resident to prove that a backup was caused by surcharging, or is the burden on the city to prove that a backup was not caused by the surcharging?
So what the application,
Yep.
what the applicant will give us basic information. We're actually doing the job for them by looking through all of the work orders, service requests, rainfall data. So I can walk you through an example, and it's an example that's been raised, and so you can kind of see anecdotally what is done. We had an application come in for a basement backup. It was in an area known to have basement backups. It was a rain event, which was, I think, 0.3 inches of rain about 24 hours prior, based upon NOAA data that was publicly available from BWI. In looking at it, no other people on the block had applied. We went out and we responded, I think, within a couple of hours. There was no evidence of a blockage. So when the inspectors go out, what they'll do is they'll pop the manholes. And what you see is you have a manhole stack that rises above the system. So if there's water rising up into the manhole stack, that suggests either surcharging or a blockage in the system. They'll go to downstream manholes, and as Councilwoman Clark said, they work pretty hard at trying to diagnose these issues. So if they get to a manhole and it's free flowing at that point, Well, you know there's a blockage in the system somewhere because it's not capacity related the whole way up. So when they know it's a capacity related issue, they'll be able to designate that, and that is actually a line on the CityWorks when they can put it into their iPads. But if it's a blockage, then we'll know that, and you'll see a work order that's generated to come to the area between the two manholes and clean out that area from the blockage. So you'll see a work order that comes out where maintenance will respond. They'll put in a jetter hose that'll say something like, we put in 300 feet, and then debris, rags, roots, fog, whatever was removed. And that will indicate that the backup, if a backup had occurred, was a result of a blockage in the system as opposed to a surcharging condition. On this occasion, because of the time difference between the rain event and the investigation, the report was system was running clear. They went to the property and it did not have a clean out, so they couldn't actually inspect the lateral at that time. So it left us with a bit of data that we did not have. We looked at it, we looked at the history of blockages or backups that we paid out in the area, and there were not any at the time. We looked at even the Google Street View, and there was actually a large oak tree or something in the front yard. That suggested maybe more likely than not that this was a result of a private side root intrusion issue. So we had denied that claim. We actually obtained access to One Rain, which is a larger network of rain gauges. When we looked at the rain gauge data in that more specific area, we found actually there was a very intense rainfall that night. It very different from what we saw at BWI. And when we get data like that, we'll go back and look at old denials and see if there's a better way to make an improvement here. So then we retroactively, based upon, this was also a home connected to an 18-inch pipe. So we were able to say, by entering this into the hydraulic model, with this rain event, 5 inches, I believe it was over, there would have been surcharging. So that was a verification of surcharging, and we went ahead and reversed that decision and paid out. So those are the kinds of efforts that go into an application in this program. We've had another instance where an individual was denied because he didn't call within 24 hours. Subsequently, we saw that his neighbor had, and his neighbor had properly applied within 24 hours, and through his neighbor, we verified a surcharging condition. We went ahead and approved that guy after the fact. So when we have that sort of data and we can do the verification, we go ahead and pay. But that is what's necessary for us to properly expend ratepayer funds. So that's a long answer to your question of who has the burden. We're essentially doing the work for the applicant at that point. And I don't look at it as an adversarial process where this is a burden on one side or the other. We're assisting the applicant in verifying a surcharging condition.
Does the model that you keep referring to, this hydraulic model, does it take into account population growth, population shifts, and climate change?
It takes into account flows within the system.
So it's a no to that question.
It doesn't look at the population necessarily, but we have flow monitors within the system, and so it's looking at the flow amounts that are coming through.
So why would it not look at if there's an increase in residents within a certain side of the city? We know that population shift happens. We're undergoing the census here, so we have an idea that there may be more people moving into Northwest Baltimore, but there may be a new development occurring which brings in another 200 to 300 residents, et cetera, to a particular area. If you're not accounting for that.
We are, but it doesn't look at it by a person. It looks at it by volume. So we would be able to tell now, looking at this, and we have limited development in areas of the city because there's not capacity in the system as indicated by our hydraulic model. So we can use it to make planning decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask, I have a couple questions, but one about the reimbursement program again. So can somebody make a claim prior to the city coming out to do their investigation or inspection?
I suppose you could, but so
part of the
you're
reason I'm asking is if you can't make a legitimate claim prior to the city doing the inspection, and there's no guarantee that the city will be out before 24 hours, I mean, aren't you sometimes getting information about who's at fault even after the time frame to be able to put in a claim is already expired?
Well, and let me kind of go back. So to file the claim, you should have receipts and things like that. You can file a claim, so you would have to fill out the application. I would assume most people would be calling 311 before they're getting on their computers, printing something out, writing down their information, putting it in the mail. So I don't think that's a reasonable outcome. But I think the point you're trying to make is, can they provide something to us to establish that
exactly.
And there would be nothing to prevent them from doing that.
Like, for example, I mean, as soon as somebody calls 311, could that be the first step in the claim?
It is always the first step, and it's a mandated first step because we want them to call within 24 hours. So that does trigger a contemporaneous investigation, so we can try to get the best data into our system. So calling 311 could be the first step in the reimbursement claim process? It is, in fact, a required first step, as it is for Cincinnati and other jurisdictions. We want to trigger that so we have that investigator going out and popping manholes and looking in them to try to determine whether he can diagnose the cause or not.
And so can you tell me again how many, I guess, claims we've had over the...
Claims or reimbursement applications?
I guess reimbursement.
So for the expedited reimbursement program, we've had 76 from the time the system, the program's been enacted.
Even with the 311 call is the first step in the claims process, but it's not necessarily the first step in the reimbursement.
First step in the reimbursement program.
It's the first step in it. And so how many calls of 311 service have we received as it relates to backups?
I don't know how we track the backup. I assume it is through 311 calls. But the evidence is, and the data is, that we've had about 4,000 basement backups a year in Baltimore.
And I guess what I'm getting to, it just seems amazing that with the number of backups we had in the city, that we would only have 74 or 76 something,
now, yeah.
100, applications for reimbursement or I mean, that just isn't that disturbing to you all? I mean, wouldn't you go wild more people?
We expected more.
I got it. Like, at what point do you go, man, why aren't people calling us? Why aren't people using? I mean, at some point you should be the ones going, there's something wrong with this, that we know we've got over almost 5,000 backups and we only have 100 applications. What's going on? There's something we're not doing to make certain that people know about this. It's not the public's fault. It's something that we're not doing. And you all should be, it really shouldn't even be us having the hearing. You all should be in meetings talking, well, what do we need to do to change this? Because clearly people aren't, we've got this $2 million sitting here for year after year after year, and clearly nobody knows about it and is using it. Oh, well, I'll just add another $15,000 to it and we keep it rolling. This really shouldn't even be happening right now as far as the hearing. You all should have had the hearing in your own office.
And historically, we have a general liability process as well. And I think historically we've seen low, claims filed, general liability claims filed. Patrick Hancock with the law department could probably speak more too.
So can I?
Go ahead. Please.
But just to build on that. So one of the things that Councilman Pinkett just had led a hearing on the 311 system. One of the things that we are aware of is that agencies can provide guidance to 311 call takers on the line of questioning that they ask constituents when they call. Why has the agency not instructed 311 call takers to ask if people have applied for the reimbursement program, if they're aware of the program, as the first step? Because we know they're not asking it, but you do have the ability to provide guidance for them to ask that question. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, and we have done training with 311. The process might be a little
So
different.
the training instructs them. So what you're saying is you are instructing 311 call takers to advise people to apply for this program.
We have gone over and informed them of the program. We have provided them with the basement
Are they
backup guide.
instructed to provide information on the program? It's a yes or no question.
I believe we told them through the basement backup guide that we were educating them as to the existence of this program.
Are they instructed to advise people to apply?
I don't recall what we said at that time. It was a while ago. But the process is a little different, right? So
that's a no.
I don't know. I don't recall. When someone makes a basement backup
You said
claim,
it was a while ago. When was the training?
it would have been when the program was initiated in April of 2018.
So in April of 20, you don't recall?
I don't. We did go over and we sat down with a manager over there and we informed them and walked them through the basement backup guide. I don't remember specifically whether we said, and you have to tell them about it.
Sounds like they're not being instructed to do that, and I'm happy for the next hearing to bring in someone from 311 to confirm this.
And that's
because
fine.
if you have 4,000 calls but 74 applicants, I think we can infer at a minimum that they're not being told about the program.
Well, when they respond, when our inspectors or maintenance staff responds to a 311 call, they leave the basement backup.
But that's after 24 hours.
They've called 311 already, so they've called within 24 hours.
Correct.
Right.
But say this is the second incident, right? And they weren't instructed in the first instance that they called of the existence of the program. So hypothetically, they could have another event occur that isn't within 24 hours that they're reporting it because they were never instructed after the first instance to call within 24 hours to be eligible for the program. Is that correct?
But under your theory, they would have not called 311 within 24 hours, right? So even if 311 had told them
But if it's there's
a basement backup program,
Correct,
but that's why we leave this pamphlet with the homeowner. So it has all the information. I believe the representative from Clean Water Action had an old one, but this certainly has information on the expedited reimbursement program, on the claims process, on everything that you need to do when you have a basement backup. That is left with all homeowners when they have called 311 complaining of a basement backup.
So one last follow-up here. For all 4,000 calls, are you telling us that there are also 4,000 inspections?
Yeah, there would be 4,000 inspections.
So hypothetically, there are at least 4,000 times people have been given that pamphlet, but only 74 have applied.
That would be my understanding, yeah.
So
we should have a service
you
request.
understand where the gap and the confusion and me understanding what you're saying to me and to the committee is that if there are people have been given, there are 4,000 plus distributed pamphlets, yet only 74 households have applied.
Yep, and I get it.
You're telling me that there are thousands of people who know about this program, know that they can get potentially $2,500 back, yet only less than 15,000 of it has been distributed after 4,000. Sir, I was a community organizer before I ran for office. I can tell you that if you are actually educating people on the existence of a resource 4,000 times, the likelihood that only 74 people would apply is astronomically low.
I don't know the figures on that. I will defer to you.
How do you confirm that after every inspection, the
There should-
pamphlet was left behind?
That I cannot tell you, because there's not going to be a
So
document.
is it possible that the inspectors aren't leaving them behind?
It's possible.
Do you have records of how many of these you've printed and distributed?
Yeah, we should. I mean, we did print them. We printed them through the print shop, 10,000.
So you've printed 10,000 in 2 years, so 8,000 have gone out.
I know that the stack I had in my office, communications came in and took them because they were running out.
So there should only be 2,000 left, essentially, give or take.
That would seem right.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, somebody want to respond?
Sorry, Yolanda Winkler.
You got to use the war on TV. You got to use the microphone.
Okay, I'm sorry. I do apologize. Yolanda Winkler, Chief of Communications and Strategic Alliances. So I'm also a community president, Mr. Chair, as you well know. And so I'm not going to defend what we have done. I will tell you, moving forward, we did recently, as you stated earlier, include a mailer in all the water bills. So we hit every one of our customers in the water bills. Going forward, what we can do, as I sat here and listened, to ensure that we reach those individuals who have had sewage backups, is I will get a list of who they are. I have liaisons that I can fan across the city who are responsible for certain districts, and make sure this information gets in the hands of those individuals who are having backups or who have not had a backup but could possibly be subject to one.
Just real quick, so this is why this new bill is going into effect, because remember, the water bills does not go to the home. It sometimes goes to the homeowner who doesn't live there, who is many times not concerned about what happens in those properties. So I'm just saying, as an FYI, that even though it goes in a water bill, sometimes it doesn't reach the person that is most affecting, that's living right in the property.
However, we do not have a relationship. You're correct. We do not have a relationship with the tenant. We have a relationship with the homeowner because we're premise-based. Yeah. So it would certainly be up to the tenant, if it's a rental unit, to contact the homeowner who they pay their rent to. They have options. They can have their rent held in escrow and go to court if the problem is not taken care of. We cannot be held accountable for that type of relationship.
No, I don't.
Our system is not set up that way.
No, I don't think we're holding anyone accountable. I think that's the point of the hearing, that we're just trying to be clear on where we need to improve on in this, because if the money is there, that's my only thing. If the money is sitting there and we're not getting into the residents, it doesn't make sense. And
well,
so
we
that's all
can,
I'm saying.
as I said, Councilwoman, we can certainly share this information wherever it needs to be shared. We can share it with the court system, and we can share it with the community leaderships, as we have already done. We can share it with all of our customers. We have it on our website. We can do a PSA. I mean, there are lots of options. We can even do a Charm TV advertisement. But what I want you to understand is, we understand the problem. Surely there has been a problem. Now it's time for us to correct the problem and correct it quickly. We heard you. We're going to work toward doing that. And, you know, that's just basically it. We have to correct the problem, and that's what we intend to do. And I think that the entire team of DPW understands that, and that's what we're going to do. So we'll fan the liaisons out. We'll get this information out, and I'm sure that the deputy director, he's here. I think he can agree with you all in terms of some of the things that need to be corrected. It's going to be corrected.
Councilman Pinkett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to also pull the health department in on this. So, do we have a map that shows the areas where we're experiencing most of the backups? That's part of the question. And then second, we heard that some of the backups are happening in properties that are vacant. So I'm just curious also, you know, what role is the health department playing in this? Because one, if there are consistent backups in areas, one, the health department should be concerned just in general, but secondly, especially if they're happening in areas where there's potentially high vacancies, where nobody is remediating these issues, you know, at what point are we really going to see, you know, the health impacts, if we haven't already seen them, that are coming from these vacant properties that potentially are, you know, experiencing these sewage backups?
And we conducted a 5-year look-back study on basement backups when we entered into the modified consent decree. So there is data on that. Whether they're specifically a map or not, I don't know, but there is that data available.
So there might not be a map of areas where there's the higher frequency of backups, or is there a map?
I'm not sure if a map was produced, but there is data on where, through our 5-year look back, where.
I mean, I think one, it's important, you know, just because it should help us prioritize our construction and where we're doing our work, we're making the infrastructure. But then two, you know, how do you perform the outreach if you don't know where, you know, the highest, you know, frequency of the backups? That we should be able to look at a map and go, you know, a heat map, and say, okay, this is an area where we need to focus on. And then for the health department, you all should just be as concerned as we are about, okay, you know, how are we going to, you know, if there's a section of the city where this is happening over and over and over, it means there's a higher likelihood that somebody is going to potentially be impacted by this sewage waste. So DPW, you need to fix this.
Paul, you want to, you got a question?
Yes, so I think he got it.
So to speak to your concern about the data itself, we're not custodians of that, and so we don't have a map specifically about the backflows. But I will say that we do respond to requests regarding investigations of backflows. So if there is a vacant property adjacent to a property that has already attended to its sewage backflow, but the property next door is still experiencing these issues, but there's no one living there, we will cite that property owner. So that does get addressed, at least through that process.
So let me ask this. So does the health department ever go through the 311 data and pull out, you know, all of the instances of sewage backflow? And if not, why not? I mean, because
it's a resource issue. It's not that we don't care.
So is it something? Maybe I'm asking the question wrong. Do you think it is something that should be of concern to the health department?
We are tremendously concerned about this.
Okay.
I mean, we worked with DPW to create literature on how to best approach sewage backup cleanup. Mm-hmm. And that's, you've heard the testimony, and it's incredibly compelling, and we agree with all of it. This is a health issue that needs to be addressed, and so we did help create that literature specifically so folks that are going to take it upon themselves to take care of these issues do it in a safe manner. Unfortunately, we don't have the resources to help them remediate them, the mess themselves. So unfortunately, we're in a situation where residents are kind of left to tend to the health mess on their own.
Yeah, I mean, and I definitely understand shortage as far as staff, personnel to do it, but I think that this is at a level where it warrants maybe even the health department, either partnering with one of the colleges and universities, some entity that could look at the data on you all's behalf to just say, hey, this is a particular area where we need to focus on. Right. This is a particular area, and just to kind of put that pressure from a public health standpoint on Department of Public Works to say, we can't allow this to continue. We may not have experienced, some health outbreaks as a result, but if it keeps going like this, something will happen.
Well, I think we were all present and were able to hear the gentleman from Hopkins whose student has actually done this work already, and so I'm very interested to see that report, and I'm sure our colleagues over at DPW are as well, and so that'll definitely be something that we review in the near future. Thank you.
Yes.
Councilman Burnett.
There's one thing I would note on the materials. It's the newest flyer, right? The newest, okay. Does the health department advise residents to clean up the debris themselves?
We would always prefer that a resident use a certified contractor, a contractor that is experienced in that kind of sewage water damage and that kind of a cleanup. Not every resident has the capacity to be able to do that. In particular, where you have owner-occupied homes, where you don't have a property owner that could be cited or called to account, to remediate the problem at the landlord's expense. But there are guidelines for if you are going to do it yourself and certain precautions that you can take, and we do provide that information to homeowners.
Do you, and I think that's provided here in this material. My concern is that we are advising people to do this themselves, which in itself is problematic given what we heard earlier, both the possible health impacts to the individual doing the work and the need for a professional to do this work. And I'm not throwing this solely at the lap of the health department, but I am saying that there's a large swath of information that's being distributed by DPW advising people on how to do this themselves who are not trained professionals.
Agreed. That's not our intent. We're not trying to force people to.
I'm not saying you're forcing them, no, and I'm not saying that DPW is either. I am saying that it does seem problematic to, and almost implies that this is somewhat safe, even though there is information on here for those watching that does give people some information. The health risks are listed here. I don't want to say it's not, but it does seem, it doesn't seem like good advice to give people advice on how to touch fecal waste.
Right, I agree, and I think we can look at those materials and revisit that. In lieu of saying nothing, the fear on the alternative side is that people will go ahead and resort to self-help with no instruction whatsoever.
That's
so
fair.
It's kind of a little bit of a balancing test, but we can certainly emphasize that we strongly urge people to do this in the safest manner possible with professionals.
Fair enough. So the question I have for DPW, has DPW ever investigated the possibility of providing direct cleanup assistance to residents who experience backups via contractors paid by the city in the same way that other cities have provided this service?
Yes, we looked into it, and I believe you're referring to Cincinnati as sort of the model here.
I wouldn't say it's the model, just another model to look at.
Another means of doing it. We do have a liability issue. The Local Government Tort Claims Act would apply if there were a situation. In looking at the Cincinnati, their program, what they do is they'll go out and quickly clean up, and then they'll make a determination after the fact whether it was the fault of the city or not. That seems problematic because if they make the determination, so they do the cleanup, and then they tell the applicant, okay, you filed a claim for property damage, we're going to go ahead and deny all of that. That creates a lot of hostility in the area. You see those in the claims that are brought before the federal judge. There are about 70 of those. A lot of them get denied because of their flooding issues. So they are located along riverbanks, so they get denied after the fact because this was a flooding problem. If we are going out and expending ratepayer funds when we are not liable, that's a problem. That's a misuse of funds. That is more of the auditing concern that I would be worried about at the outset.
So just to be clear, the agency's position is that the resident should kick out money of their own instead of having professionals come and remove the health hazard from their own basement.
The preference would be that you hire a professional, and then we will reimburse you for that cost in a quicker manner. So the way that this was developed, It was in reaction. We have a general liability claims process. So if you're looking at us versus Cincinnati, and they said they do three things, right? They do cleaning, they do broader damages for property damages, and then they do prevention. We do all of those as well. We don't do the cleaning specifically. We pay for the cleaning in an expedited manner. The general liabilities claims process covers the property damage issues, and then we have a $2.6 billion program to work on the prevention. So the data was, it takes, due to resources, and I'm not being critical of the law department, they have a lot of general liability claims. It takes a while to get the documents from DPW in this instance, to do an analysis of the documents, to determine whether there's negligence involved. It takes a while. That was the critique of the way we were doing business in Baltimore. So they wanted us to determine a program, so we could pay out people for the cleaning and disinfection of the property to encourage them to get that cleanup done quicker. And so the requirement was for us to do that program and to pay out within 60 days. The requirement was based on surcharging capacity-related issues, because based upon that negligence standard that would determine whether the city is liable or not, what we took a shortcut and said, if there's a capacity-related issue, we should know about it through our hydraulic model, and we do. So we know where we have capacity-related issues. It's not whether there's a map or not. We know when we have a problem. And so we'll skip over the notice issue, and we'll pay out those claims that are properly verified for having a capacity-related issue. And we do that within 60 days.
So how did you arrive at the $2,500 number?
That predates my time with the city. I know it was done through negotiation.
How did the agency decide that $2,500?
It was a negotiated term with EPA and MDE.
Was it based on actual data associated with the cost of cleaning up wastewater in your basement?
I'm not sure.
Is there anyone that can answer these questions? No, they don't. So it sounds like
what I will
it's not based on. I mean, it would be an easy yes if we did base it on what we know the cost to be. So the premise that you're saying is that it makes more sense to reimburse people for a rapid cleanup that they're paying for out of pocket if they can, but we don't know that the number, the cap, did the EPA give you a cap on what the reimbursement should be?
No, the floor was $2,500. Yep.
So you could do more.
And we're in a pilot program, and so we'll assess.
Not to do more, but without any enforcement from the EPA saying that you could not do more. But the amount was also not determined based on the average cost of cleanup.
You can't, we're being televised, so we gotta have decorum, you gotta use the microphone. Let's keep it in order so we, go ahead.
So it sounds to me, based on all of the folks here from the agency, that there's no evidence that there was any evidence that arriving or data used to arrive at that number. Is that correct?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
And more importantly, we have data regarding cleanup costs that people are submitting through their applications now.
What's the average cleanup cost?
I would say, I haven't done the average, but I can say that when a company does come in, it exceeds generally the $2,500 cap.
So generally speaking, we know that the cap we've placed is inadequate to address the actual scale of the problem.
Yes, what they can do, and even people who get a successful and paid application are still entitled to file a general liability claim and receive any damages that they weren't not compensated for under the expedited program.
Okay. I mean, my hope, just a general statement, that when we revisit this, we can actually look at actual data on what the actual costs are, and so that we have something to better measure where this number came from. It sounds like this was also negotiated 17 years ago.
No. It was part of the modified consent decree.
Modified
There was not an expedited reimbursement program in 2002. So it was 2017. So this is only a one-year-old program.
Yeah, so this program is brand new.
Yeah.
This is the first time.
Sure.
We know it probably needs to change some. And what we talked about was the cost, the numbers, all of that stuff. You know, that's all part of the negotiation, and that's something that we're happy to look at.
But that's the point of a pilot program. I mean, we're going to get data that better informs what we do when we get to the final program. So this program runs, we do an assessment now, right? So we're in the middle of doing an assessment with EPA and MDE. We will establish a final program that will run the course for the rest of the term of the consent decree. That will be established April 6, 2021. So the pilot program is to inform that process and to get data.
This pilot will run into, for the next 2 years, we'll be compensating people at a level that I think we can agree is inadequate.
Well, we're doing a reassessment now.
Yeah, it can be changed. It can be changed before the 3 years. Like they said, it's just a floor. It can be adjusted. So I think we just wanted to get baseline data now. We recognize that there's some things we need to do. I don't know for sure, but I would venture to guess that $2,500 was probably what people think of with a deductible. I'm thinking, but I don't know for sure. It predated me as well.
Well, I mean, we've had someone here from the Maryland Insurance Administration that indicated that that's probably not correct, but also your own program, you can't use the funds for deductibles anyway.
No,
so,
you can use it. We do pay out for deductibles. If
so you can use the $2,500 for a deductible.
Correct, yes, and we do. And so if you are out, whatever you're out of pocket, we might not, if the insurance company paid $5,000, we wouldn't reimburse for the $5,000. We would reimburse you for the deductible.
So it says on your own materials,
yep,
the expedited reimbursement program offers to repay up to $2,500 of cleanup and disinfection costs that are documented properly.
Correct.
So where does it say that it can be used for a deductible?
That's a proper documentation. So it's a proper documentation of what you're out of pocket for. So we do it all the time. So when you file proof of your insurance claim, you file a notice of what your deductible was, and we will pay for that, and we have.
Okay. Sorry. Oh, right. Yeah. Okay.
And if I may as well, to go back to the Cincinnati case, I have seen at least one case where the cleaning company went in and threw away things that the homeowner did not want disposed of, and that was something that fell outside of their system. I think there is a bit of an issue when the contract is with the city and not with the homeowner. The incentive is a little different there. If you are contracting with the cleanup company directly, I think you have more of a say in how they're doing the work. So I think the reimbursement program is informed that way.
I think you have. I disagree with that. I mean, the assumption is that, like, you know what you're asking for, and that you're a subject matter expert into what the work should look like. I think the opposite would be true, that if there are professionals advised that are vetted by the agency itself, walking people through the process, it's a little bit different than going into the open market to find someone to do this work.
They would be the
have
same
to disagree
contractors.
with that. But the other thing I'd mention is on all of the materials provided, again, I don't want to beat the dead horse here, but it continues to say that you can only be reimbursed for cleanup and disinfection costs. Are you referring, when you say that you can get reimbursed for your deductible, are you talking about the law department's a separate reimbursement program, that your initial version of this?
If you hired ServPro, you filed an insurance claim with your insurance carrier, and you paid a deductible and you were recompensed from your insurance carrier for hiring ServPro, we will pay your deductible. We have done that. We can provide you the data.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what this next hearing is going to be all about, is a sort of a deeper dive into all of this information. So I would just say come prepared to talk about that. I don't have anything else.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. There's no offense regards to DPW. I think we heard from the health department. The law department has anything they want to say? Is the law department here?
Yes.
I have a list of still people in the audience that want to testify, and we're going to, like I say, we're going to come back. But go ahead. You came in with a favorable report, but go ahead.
Yes, sir. My name is Patrick Hancock, and I'm the head of the Central Bureau of Investigations, so it's the claims unit. And we do handle claims for any type of general liability or auto liability claim that comes in from the public. And our goal is to pay those claims, only those claims, that there exists some level of liability or negligence of the city. For example, auto accidents caused by one of our vehicles is paid. The property damage, bodily injury is paid. Same thing with a sewer backup. We investigate that. We send the report over to our partners in Public Works. They then investigate, and it all depends on whether the city, the agency, somehow caused or made an error that led to that unfortunate backup. So, for example, most times, Public Works is just responding, and we find that there are situations outside of the agency's control. People put things that they shouldn't down into the system, and there are also roots, an aging system, grease from restaurants. So primarily what we see is that the agency gets there as quick as they can, fixes it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the city was negligent.
So you're with the law department?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so not to go into the weeds because we're going to have some work sessions, but my question is that how many, can you supply us with the number that you approved or whatever?
Yes, we can provide, we could provide.
I know from my experience that sometimes it takes 2 or 3 times before an applicant or resident can get that money because the law department will deny it, and then they got to go back again 2 or 3 times, and you got to confer with the DPW, unless the one testimony, and I'm not being rude and ugly about it, the one testimony is that if someone calls the mayor's office, and I'm not focused on Mayor Young, but somebody contacts the mayor's office and they say yes, then like that one testimony, it happened. But I don't want to go into the weeds of all that, but do you have anything you want to ask?
How many claims has the law department approved?
I'd be happy to provide that data.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
We appreciate it.
When people contact the law department, do you also advise them to apply for this expedited reimbursement program?
No, we do not.
Okay. There we go. Okay. We heard from the law department, the health department. What about the mayor's office of emergency management? Is someone here from that?
Director McMillan with the Mayor's Office of Emergency Management. I guess first I'd like to thank the council for their leadership. I certainly learned a lot today. I was not aware of this reimbursement program. Our job as an office is actually to coordinate around emergency response to acute emergencies. So I was very deeply involved in the response to the flooding that occurred along Frederick Ave in the Beachfield community. We did a lot in terms of trying to bridge the gap between what citizens had in terms of insurance and their own capability to clean versus what the reality was on the ground. We brought in volunteers from Team Rubicon, which is an ex-military, basically philanthropic group that came in and did muck out. We also brought in a Southern Baptist Convention disaster relief group that did mold remediation and other cleanup. Sewage, which is a Buddhist disaster relief fund that provided money to citizens for basically appliances, heaters, et cetera, that were damaged by the flooding there. But certainly, hearing from the gentleman from Cincinnati, I think that program sounds very progressive. And as a citizen who lives in the west side of Baltimore, more in line with what I would like to see happen. I understand that there's fiscal concerns, but I would also have similar questions about how that fund does or doesn't work. But in terms of what I'd like to do going forward, I'd love to leverage our social media presence and our interaction in terms of outreach with the community to get information out about this program. And I probably look at the number being in the 70s. That also seems like it should be much, much higher given the problem that we have. But I think a lot was learned by myself today in terms of that interaction between the sanitary sewer lines and basically storms. So I think there's a lot more the city can do there. And I'd like to offer, my agency's assistance in any way that we can get that information out there to the public, particularly in my case when we're responding to those acute emergencies where we have very sudden heavy rainfalls. We're in charge of putting out a lot of information to the public, alerts about where flooding is occurring and what citizens can do. I want to piggyback on what the health department said. Certainly we're not encouraging citizens to go out and to clean these conditions, but we do put out information about if you're going to take care of any of this yourself, how to try to safely do so. The ideal scenario is a licensed professional comes in, is covered by your insurance, and then you pay your deductible, and ideally it would be that that deductible is covered in whole by this reimbursement program that I would like to help get the information out to the public about. So certainly we don't want people, particularly people who are infirm, elderly, kids, involved in cleaning this up, but we also don't want to have a lack of information out there about the risks there and how to properly deal with it. So there's a lot the city has to deal with this issue. Certainly the consent decree has acutely brought on some conditions that I think we're all going to have to do more about. So I want to be part of the solution there.
Just a quick question. So I'd asked to Mr. McMillan. So earlier you heard me ask about the hydraulic model used by the agency, and it was confirmed that climate change is not part of that calculation. Based on your knowledge, is that something that should be included in any assessment of what root causes of these problems may be?
So it's a little bit outside of my expertise. My background is emergency management, and then before that, once upon a time, political science. In terms of what we're trying to do with Frederick Ave in that area, we have a number of grants we've applied to, the flood mitigation grants, hazard mitigation grants, where a lot of that money is going towards increased modeling of the floodplain and the hydrology. We're working with the United States Army Corps of Engineers and the Silver Jackets, which is the group that will come out and do kind of advanced hydraulic modeling. So we're doing that this is just for the west side, given what happened with Frederick. I think there's more modeling we could do throughout the city and a lot of modeling that exists. I think at the same time, climate change is a scientific reality at this point. I'm not sure, I'm not a scientist in that area, how that all should affect the modeling, but it certainly affects the considerations for, I think, the infrastructure that we're putting in and what needs to be done to be prepared and resilient as a city. We're seeing an increased amount of flooding and severe weather. Really, since I've been the director, or since I've been with the agency, we've had a number of federally declared disasters around coastal flooding, riverine flooding, et cetera, when the average is supposed to be once every 5 years. Now, clearly things hypothetically could average out, but looking at the science, we're having more declarations, more serious incidents at a higher rate, and it's going to keep increasing, I suspect. So I would hope that any of these models that the Silver Jackets, that the experts are doing, taking that into account. Certainly our alert warning systems that look at stream gauge data, we are looking into taking that into account. One of the grants that we are applying for in the hazard mitigation grant program is to put in more stream gauges into that system. And we're looking at, within my office and working with the National Weather Service, revising those thresholds for what level on the stream gauges triggers what kind of notification from my office to the public. And some of that is really about basically, again, just clear water, clean water flooding. but it is obviously, I'm learning today more than I even realized, adjacent to and a part of the problem with our sanitary sewer lines. So I think the more that we can do to, I know DPW is doing a lot of work in terms of their studies to look at the system and to remediate and to detect these blockages. So we have a good relationship with them, whatever we can do to help move that along. But we are, with all these grants and other ways, we are looking at increased and updated modeling.
Thank you.
Okay. I have one question, Mr. Hancock, and then we're going to go on to testimony. Do any of the insurance companies try to recoup the cost?
Subrogate against the city after a claim is paid.
Okay.
I'd have to do some research to give you.
Answer that if you could just supply us with that information.
Sure.
I would appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay. At this time, you okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
Tori Rose from the audience. Tori Rose. Eva Wygren, if I'm pronouncing that word. Eva Wygren. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Where's the microphone? DPW. Go ahead.
All right. Cool. So my name is Eva Wingren. I'm a city resident in Greenmount West, and I want to thank you all for holding this hearing on this important issue, and thank you to everyone who has, stayed through dinner time for this. I'll try to keep it brief. I am speaking today as a former Baltimore City landlord. I moved here in 2016, and in 2017 I bought 2 row homes in my neighborhood because I wanted to preserve them as affordable housing. And unfortunately that didn't work out, and it was directly because of a sewage backup issue that I decided to get out of the landlording business. And I just want to talk about some of how I as a landlord view the risks related to sewage that would, disincentivize, I think, other people from investing in Baltimore City. So the sewage backup happened in September of 2018. And I actually thought up until today that I had applied and been denied from the program, but I guess what actually happened was I called 311 within 24 hours. I guess they sent someone, although I was, running back and forth with insurance people and, trying to make sure that I was at the house every time somebody said, be there at this time, we need access. And I don't remember granting access to DPW, but I do remember getting the pamphlet. So to your question, pamphlets are being distributed. I don't know if they needed access to the house in order to determine anything. But I remember reading the pamphlet and going, and feeling like they had sort of told me no, or it was not going to be a path that would get me reimbursements. So I ended up going through insurance. It cost about $10,000. I paid a $1,000 deductible. And so I feel like I got off really lucky compared to how a lot of people have been experiencing this. It was also fairly, the basement was fairly empty, so no possessions of the tenant were damaged, but both me and the tenant ended up having to take off a lot of work, and it was really disruptive to our lives. And so because of that, I started learning about, the consent decree and all of the issues with Baltimore City's system. And I was just like, I don't feel like I can take that risk that, something in the city's system is going to break and I'm going to be potentially stuck with, doing this all over again. I didn't know at the time, and I've actually found out through being involved in this process as an advocate about people's insurance companies cutting them off for too many claims. And that's definitely something that I'm really concerned about. I remember seeing social media posts of folks in California whose homes have been burned, and the insurance companies are cutting them off as well. And that just seems like there's going to be no coming back from that for those communities, because you can't get a mortgage if you don't have insurance, let alone, like, nobody would take the risk of buying a home where they don't have insurance. And so I think Baltimore just has enough problems keeping its people that I don't want us to have the potential of major sewage issues as being another problem and another risk that people take living here. And so I really appreciate the folks who talked about how insurance kind of plays into how people are addressing the sewage backups. And I definitely think that the city offering direct cleanup assistance is a way for us to get around the fact that, you know, if people have multiple claims to their insurance, they're just going to get cut off. I also think that something like co-insurance, or the way we have a national flood insurance program, because private companies won't do it because it's too high of a risk. I mean, if nobody's happy with how the reimbursement program is being managed, maybe you could think about, like, what would it look like to use insurance as kind of a vehicle or a model for creating a system where the risks are mitigated and that it's safer for everyone. Because, like I said, I feel like with my situation, I got off relatively easily, and I honestly don't know. I think there's a lot of gray area as to whether my situation was actually caused by, like, something that the city had control over, or like a weather event. But just the overall risk really changed my perception as a landlord of, you know, feeling like Baltimore City was a good investment. I think that's all I want to say, and I'm probably out of time. So thank you very much, everyone.
So just one quick question.
Yeah.
So you did get the flyer, which is encouraging.
Yeah.
When you called 311, were you advised about the program? The existence of either the law department's reimbursement program or DPW's program?
I knew that DPW had a program for reimbursement, but I was a little hazy on the details, and that could have been my
Well, no, the
issue.
question is, did the
Yeah.
call taker advise you on the existence of either program? Do you recall that?
I think I might have done it on an app.
Sure.
I'm
fair.
more of an app person. Yeah. But yes, I did. I was aware that the program existed.
Okay.
Thank you
you.
for waiting this long to testify. Dorothy Conaway? There's nobody on this one, right? Okay. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Dorothy Conaway. I live in the 4300 block of Bellevue Avenue, and I am in the West Arlington area. And prior to the 2018 flooding, or the sewage backup that we had, there was one that we had earlier, I don't know, 5-10 years earlier, that was really severe, and that was the first time that we had to actually replace floors, walls, everything in our basement. And we did put in a backflow suggestions from the city. So when this one occurred in July 25th, 2018, the first thing we did was call 311, and no, we were not notified of any kind of pamphlets or anything like that. We got nothing. I found out about the program for reimbursement from the president of our association. We talked a lot because I was calling everybody at that time because it was just so much. And I'm talking about the water, the sewage coming in and just going up almost to the ceiling in the basement. But anyway, so filed the report, and it was interesting. We filed it on the we mailed it on the 22nd, and it was stamped that it was received on September 27th.
What month was that?
September. Okay. September 22nd was when we mailed it, the application. And it was stamped received on September 27, 2018. The letter for denying the reimbursement was dated the exact same date, September 27th. So I don't even know if they looked at the packet.
So you were denied the same day
Hello.
It was marked as received?
The date of the letter, September 27, 2018. And then the reason for the denial, and just give me a couple of minutes, it said the agency's...
No, you're good. Go ahead.
I just clarify.
Oh. The agency's investigator responded to your incident and determined that the incident was not caused by surcharging in the sewer collection system due to wet weather, but caused by rags and debris that were removed from the sanitary sewer main line. See attachments. There were no attachments. And my question, then I started calling everybody, anybody I could, to find out what exactly that meant. If you're saying, and the reports there were 3 inspectors that came out, as a matter of fact. The first investigative report was July 26. Now, the storm was July 25th, okay? July 26, 2018, 10:35. Then somebody else came out with a work order, 10:58, same date. And then later that evening, 1:08 p.m., or 8:34 p.m., came out with another work order. So I'm asking, okay, the main line the line from our house to the city line was clear. That's what the report said, was clear. So I started asking questions. So if it's the main line, rags and debris, why were we denied? Now, my understanding is the decree was written to exclude certain things. And apparently it was written to exclude the surcharging of the water and also debris that was in the main line. So that was some understanding. So I started asking some other questions. And I did talk with Mr. DeSantis. And one of the questions I asked was, how does the rainwater get into the sewer line? Because I went to a lot of meetings and a lot of different kinds of panel discussions, or whatever it was, I'm not sure. But it said that the sewer line and the storm drain was separate, the rain, wherever the rain comes. I don't know all the terms, okay? I'm just trying to put all this together. And a lot of people were telling me a lot of different things that didn't make sense to me. I appreciate some of the questions because that you asked here, because they were questions that I had. And if I got the answers, I didn't understand what they were talking about. But I wanted to know, how did the rainwater get into the sewer channel, okay? And that would cause the sewage to back up and into people's homes. And like they explained here, it's an old system and there's cracks and stuff, so you've got this storm water getting into there. And so how long has this been happening? And somebody said earlier, 17, 20 years, so they didn't know we had cracks or whatever. I also asked a question about capacity. With all the new developments, buildings going up in the area, how come it wasn't investigated to see if the sewer lines weren't big enough to accommodate all of this other stuff coming in, being built in there? So, that's probably another hearing. But there was capacity issues that I wanted to know with new constructions in the area. Didn't anybody look to see if the sewage, that they could handle that water, the problems that could happen? Didn't really get an answer to that. The start for the cleanup, the starting fee for just the cleanup was $3,538.61. I'm gonna be real. That was just a start for me. So when they said that, maybe you would be reimbursed $2,500, something like that, I guess something's better than nothing. But, it's just so many issues that I was very uncomfortable with. I kept calling around trying to get answers. I got a lot of different answers that still didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And I knew that sewage was like, 3 times the water consumption on your water bill. So I'm saying there's a lot of money out there. There's a lot of money that's supposed to be allotted for some of these things. Where is it? What's happening to it? So those are my issues, and I just tried to summarize because it's late and everybody needs to go home and eat. So,
Thank you for waiting for you. If you could, we'd appreciate it, the committee, whatever you have, if you could send to us so we could, for the next hearing, we can look at it, if you don't mind.
you want my letter that says
You
about
could,
the surcharge?
yeah, take your time. I mean, you don't have to do it tonight. I mean,
Okay.
you can send it to
Who do I
Jen.
send it to? I'll be happy to send. They have it. They sent it to me.
Before you go, my staff, we can make copies.
Oh, great. Okay,
Yeah,
whatever you.
there you
And
go.
we have it all electronically too. We can
That's-
email.
Yeah, we'll just, I'm not having a debate, go back and forth on this. England, is that England Cronus, or if I say that? Last name looks like CRONSH, first name is English, no? Okay. You got the last words that you want to say?
No. So one, thank you all for, it is late, so I will step off the soapbox at 8 o'clock. But thank you all for coming out. I thank you, Chairman, for not voting this out today, because I think there's a tremendous amount of information that we still need to hear on the operations of this program. I know I have a long list of additional questions, so I look forward to continuing a dialogue on this.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to, we're not going to conclude, we're going to go on recess and look at doing work sessions. Believe it or not, it's tonight, 3.5 hours, as far as I'm concerned, it was very healthy, hearing from both sides. I just want DPW to understand none of this is personal. I mean, you have, the years I've been in the council, there's a number of regards to city employees that care, they have a lot of compassion, their pride in the job that they do. I just want to say that sitting here listening to the advocates and community people, representatives that testified, I honestly believe that there is an issue with DPW in regards to some management practices. I'm trying to be civil. I think some people, I'm just saying it, within the department, it's not just DPW, but they don't really care, listen to the testimony. I know from a fact for myself, dealing with constituents, it's 311, I don't want to ramble on, we've been here long enough, that they go through the process, like the one gentleman said that he contacted the director and there's been no response. I mean, that's him saying, but I just think that this is a major problem, and we just can't have, as the councilman said, just have one hearing for people to come out and vent, you know what I mean, and make a grievance on the issues. Even with the health department, this is a health issue, and the health department should really be included in this, okay? It's not, I'm not beating up on the health department by just saying, hey, SDBW's issue, we respond to 311 complaints. I think this is really a big issue, and I think we really need to go in deep into the weeds, whether, you know, regards to 311, you know, with the different agencies, and really sit down, not to go on blamer mode to beat everybody up, but come in with some kind of workable solution. Because when I look at myself from being in management from 2002, and here we are 2019, and we're looking at 2030, questions about how's the money being spent, why is it sitting there. There's a lot of issues and concerns that's got to be answered. So what we're going to do, we're going to go in recess on City Council Resolution 19-0159, and I'm going to sit down with the sponsor and some of my committee members and with the president of City Council, and come up with a plan on how to deal with all this to make sure that the citizens of Baltimore are cared about. So, thank you.